Chapter 1, Chasing a Dream. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. Whenever the winds blew across the mountains, the trees of Jade Orchid Mountain would rustle with green billows, and when the golden light of the sunset cast itself across the lush mountain, it would plate the trees in gold, a sea of green flashing with golden scales, a gorgeous sight beyond words. In the kingdom of Sage Heart, this was famously known as the rising jade meets setting Sunday. The rosy cloud domains prodigious energies that locked the heavens and sealed the earth, the gold ignis astral winds that not even those cultivators who sought immortality dared to confront, were nothing but beautiful scenes that had drawn much fame and countless sightseers. But for the common folk who lived on this land, neither the jade forest nor the golden sunset could match the importance of their fields. In Little River Village at the base of Jade Orchid Mountain, several dozen families were working their fields. It was the middle of spring, the time to sow seeds. But in one field, a single youth was working the field alone. He appeared to be 10-some years old, but he was handling this large field all by himself, his childish face covered in sweat. Big brother Tangji. A crisp voice came from the distance. The youth raised his head and saw a girl with her hair tied up in two bunches, sticking out from her head like two goat horns, running over with a bowl of water. She wasn't a very pretty girl, and years of working in the field had made her skin rather tough and tanned, but her large eyes sparkled brightly with vim and vigor. The girl held the bowl in front of the boy. Big brother Tangji, aren't you tired? Have some water. Thank you. The boy took the bowl of water, but rather than drinking, he absent-mindedly looked at the reflection of his face. It was a rather good-looking face. It was slightly gaunt, the skin fair and clear, and it sported a very handsome nose bridge. In truth, the nose was the most important part about a person's face. If the nose looked good, the person's entire appearance would be improved. The boy had this sort of enchanting nose, but his soft and weak eyes failed to match, making him seem rather cowardly and timid. He didn't like it much, so he squinted his eyes, straightened his neck, and clenched his muscles. His eyes became much sharper, and his demeanor became more intimidating. In his memories, he had had another name, also Tangji. Note, the names share the same pronunciation, though the second character is different. The first name uses while this one uses dot. Tangji, will be written as Tangji to differentiate them. On Earth, he had been an ordinary office worker at a certain company in a certain city. His father had been the chief physician at the city hospital while his mother had been a math teacher. If he had continued on the normal course of life, Tangji probably would have advanced up the ranks in his company, and if he did well, he could have become a leader of the nation with limitless possibilities. Tangji had worked diligently toward this goal and had earned the appreciation of his superiors. He had even hooked up with a girlfriend who was from a similarly influential family. Though she had a short temper, she didn't have any major problems. No one could have expected that Tangji would face disaster. Tangji had just been walking on the street when a man flailing around a knife ran out and made Tangji his second victim. He had seen that savage-faced stranger slashing at a random woman a step ahead of him, and then the man had stabbed his sharp knife into Tangji's chest. The little Tangji had died in a rather similar fashion. 2 years ago, when little Tangji had just reached the age of 10, he had gone out hunting on the mountain with his parents and fellow villagers. While the rest of the village was focused on dealing with a giant bear, a boar with 2 sharp tusks had appeared. It had punched a hole in little Tangji's chest in the same place where Tangji had been stabbed. In the end, it had died under the frenzied attack of Tangji's parents, who also died bringing it down. But something that could be considered either tragic or comic took place. Tangji didn't die. He came back to life. It was at that moment that Tangji arrived in the boy's body. Upon arriving, he discovered that he was an orphan. Fortunately, his initial confusion and hesitation had been taken for despair and grief at the loss of his parents. Under the care of the other villagers, he gradually grew used to this new environment and began to energetically apply himself to his new life. 2 years had since passed much more quickly than he could have imagined. Big brother Tangji, drink. The little girl's big eyes gleamed as she spoke to Tangji. Oh. Stirred from his nostalgia by the girl's call, He drank the bowl of slightly muddied water. The little girl giggled happily as she watched Tangji drink the water down. Looking around at the field, she said, "Brother Tangji, you probably can't do all this alone. Let me help you." The little girl was about to get to work when Tangji stopped her. "Yaya, that's not needed. There's only half left of this field, and I can get it done in another 2 days." "But don't you still have 3 fields on the eastern end of the village?" "There's no way you can do them on your own." "I already sold them," Tangji indifferently replied. "Sold them?" Yaya's eyes flew open in shock. "You sold your family's land? What will you do in the future?" Tangji didn't answer. Instead, a middle-aged man walked over and lovingly caressed Yaya's head. "Silly little girl, you still don't get it? Little Ji's mind isn't here. He wants to go out." "Go out?" Yaya looked in a daze at Tangji. You want to leave Little River Village?" For the people of the Rosy Cloud Domain, a girl of 12 wasn't young. It would be extremely normal for her to be married off after another 2 years. Though Tangji was an orphan, he was extremely smart, since he had the soul of an adult. He also looked rather handsome and cool. It was only natural for little girls to like him. She had never expected to hear that Tangji wanted to leave. Yaya became extremely dejected. Tangji nodded. "Uncle Lee is right. Next year, I'll sell off these last 2 fields and then leave." "What are you going to do?" the little girl said in a trembling voice. "Go and see the world outside," Tangji replied. "What's so good about the outside?" Yaya couldn't understand what Tangji was thinking at all. That Uncle Lee sighed. "Little Ji, you'd better think this over carefully. The world is a tough place, and while Little River Village is a poor place, it's a rare spot of peace and safety. If you leave this place, your life isn't guaranteed to improve. The money you have from selling the land won't be able to last you very long." "Uncle Lee, I know. I have hands and feet and know how to take care of myself. And besides, isn't there still another year?" Tangji calmly replied. Uncle Lee could tell from this reply that his mind was made up, so he could only sigh and say no more. At this moment, there was a blinding flash of light in the distance, like the rising sun, and everyone was forced to close their eyes until the light died away. After that came a rumble of thunder that made little Yaya turn pale and fall on her butt. Everyone raised their head at the same time and saw that the weather had suddenly changed. The sky had darkened, and the golden sea of clouds had been whipped into a frenzy. There were clearly 2 people flying through the sea of clouds, the clouds around them wildly roiling and dancing. One of them was covered in dazzling golden light that made him appear like a god who had descended to the mortal realm. The other wore billowy white robes and swung around a sword that unleashed clouds of sword chi. Wherever the light of the sword went, countless trees atop Jade Orchid Mountain would snap. "Xamuyang, you can't run. Just obediently submit yourself." The golden armored figure pushed through the sword light and thrust a large palm at the white-robed man. Unperturbed, the white-robed man dodged to the side. A massive handprint descended from the heavens, slamming into the large stone atop Jade Orchid Mountain and instantly crushing it into powder. The mountain top shuddered. Immortals are fighting?" The villagers of Little River Village looked up and cried out in alarm. Tossing aside their hoes, they ran for shelter. When immortals battled, mortals suffered. The common folk living in the Rosy Cloud Domain had long ago learned how to avoid the fallout from immortal battles. Though Little River Village was remote and lacking in spiritual energy, the villagers rarely seeing immortals, they had still taken the precaution of excavating caves to hide in. The villagers ran into the cellars beneath their homes. Only Tangji continued to view the immortals battle from a distance, a fervent light in his eyes. He muttered, "Immortals. Those are immortals." From the moment he had come to this world, he had known that this world had cultivators, but he had never truly seen an immortal. Tales regarding immortals were like legends, existing only in the imagination. Thus, even though he yearned to become one, he did not desperately pursue it. But today, he finally saw it. The 2 immortals in the clouds unleashed prodigious strength with every moment, and with each clash, the aftershocks obliterated everything in their path and even caused the earth to quake. Was this the power of immortals? Tangji had never expected that his first time seeing immortals would be so splendid and grandiose. At this moment, he was seized by an intense urge. "I want to be an immortal." There was no reason, and he did not need a reason. The divine grace the immortals displayed as they scattered the golden clouds was enough to fill his heart with infinite yearning. Thus, with one glance, Tangji had made up his mind to seek immortality no matter what. "Yes, this is why I came to this world," Tangji muttered. As for why he wanted to become immortal, what sort of immortal he would become, or even what immortals were, Tangji didn't care. None of it was important. Immortals were immortals, and just by being one, his wish would be fulfilled. He strode toward the two immortals battling in the distant sky. "Tangji, come back!" Uncle Lee called out. Tangji shouted back, "Go and hide. I'm going to take a look. Perhaps one of them will take me as their disciple." "That's impossible," Uncle Lee shouted. "The door to immortality is difficult to enter." "Little G, don't be stupid." Tangji laughed. He naturally understood how difficult it was to step through the door of immortality. It was human instinct to seek strength. Tangji wanted to seek immortality. So why wouldn't others? It was precisely because everyone in the world sought immortality that the threshold was so high. One could compare it to the test he had taken to get his job in his last life, and the temptation of immortality was many times greater than that of a job. To compare it to an army of tens of thousands trying to cross a single plank would not be at all excessive. But that was why he had to try and work even harder to pursue it. A man could not live for more than 100 years, and he could not waste it away in mediocrity. He was fortunate enough to have been reborn, so he needed to valiantly press forward so that he could live up to the generous gifts of the heavens and not let down this second life. It did not matter that the path to immortality was difficult or dangerous. They were simply momentary spots and scenes in the path of life, and it was only right that he thoroughly experience them. Turning his head to Uncle Lee, Tangji called, "I know it's difficult, which is why I have to take every chance I get." Saying this, he ran toward the summit of Jade Orchid Mountain. "No, don't go. You'll die," Uncle Lee and Xianxia called out together. Battles between immortals could shake the heavens. If a mortal like him got close, the aftershocks alone could obliterate his body. To charge right in was no different from suicide. The other villagers also saw Tangji running in the direction of the battle and realized what he was doing, and they shouted, "Little G, don't be dumb. Even if you run up to the side of an immortal, they won't accept you." Tangji smiled. "I know. But while trying might result in failure, not trying means I'll never get a chance." With the sea of golden clouds raging above, he lowered his head and charged forward for his dreams. Chapter 2, Tragic Turn. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. The battle in the sky continued. That heaven-consuming magic power stirred the air into a hurricane, and the sky darkened. That golden-armored god was still swinging his powerful arms, each hit striking the air and stirring up a howling gale. The immense wind pressure was like a tornado, creating barriers of wind that made each step forward excruciatingly difficult for Tangji. On the other hand, that white figure weaved through the wind. With each swing of his sword, a powerful sword beam would cleave across the sky like a bolt of lightning. When they struck the earth below, they left behind deep fissures. Tangji had to be cautious and avoid these stray attacks from the heavens. He ran against the wind pressure, dodged the lightning, maneuvered his way through the forest, and jumped between giant rocks. He was as nimble as a monkey as he rushed toward the summit of Jade Orchid Mountain. Only could he see the immortals in the sky, could he have the chance to talk with them. There was another flash of light in the sky. Tangji instinctively lunged forward, and behind him, a beam of sword lightning crashed down, blasting a rock that he had stepped on earlier. The rock was obliterated, and the shockwave struck Tangji and sent him flying. He grunted and spat out blood, after which he jumped to his feet, grabbed a hanging branch of a tree, and swung forward on it. The farther he charged, the stronger the power of the aftershocks became. By the time he had reached the midway point of the mountain, gales were ripping across the slope, sword lightning was raining down in a deluge, and sand and gravel flew through the air. And then Tangji stopped. He had no choice except to stop. This was because there were no trees to shelter behind up ahead. The summit of Jade Orchid Mountain had already been completely shorn of trees. Those beams of sword energy and the omnipresent wind pressure whirled and howled across the top of the mountain, creating a world-destroying momentum. To press any farther would mean certain death. Could he not even get close? Tangji hopelessly looked up at the sky. Those two figures in the sky had reached the most intense moment of their battle. A blurry figure had appeared behind the golden armored god. The moment this phantom appeared, Tangji felt a boundless pressure. He found that he could not see the face of that phantom, but it felt to him as if held up the heavens, its feet rooted to the earth and its head holding up the void. It was a majestic figure that one could not directly look at, and it instilled respect and awe in all who beheld it. Tangji could barely control his body as it sought to prostrate. At this moment, the white figure suddenly shouted, "Rise!" The bald top of Jade Orchid Mountain suddenly exploded with light that formed into an enormous net and locked down the entire region, including the golden armored god. 8 gates heaven seal formation. So you were ready for this, Xianxia? The golden armored god howled. The phantom behind him fiercely punched at this heaven-enclosing net. The massive net erupted with light as it trembled, the space within the formation trembling with it. Shockwaves of air rippled and surged out of the formation. Tangji paled in fright, and he cast aside all other thoughts and ran back, lunging behind a giant boulder. A howling torrent of wind blew overhead, sweeping up clouds. This powerful gust of wind lasted for a good several seconds, causing the giant stone to sway and almost squash Tangji. Holy shit, is this a nuclear bomb? Tangji softly cursed. Of course, it was much weaker than an actual nuclear bomb, but it probably had the force of several thousand tons of TNT. The golden armored god's heaven alarming strike scattered apart that 8 gates heaven seal formation, even slicing off a part of the top of Jade Orchid Mountain. These were both indicators of the sheer power packed into that strike. But after this strike, the phantom behind the golden armored god disappeared. The white-clothed man used this chance to swing his sword, striking the golden armored god in the chest. The golden armored god screamed as blood gushed out. The golden armored god swayed a little in the air, almost falling from the clouds. It was clear that this one slash had dealt him an enormous wound. Without the slightest hesitation, he turned and fled. As he fled, he left behind one last threat. Xianxia, you can't run. Once Master comes, your death is assured. The voice lingered in the air as the golden armored god transformed into a golden beam of light and shot toward the horizon. The man in white did not pursue. He watched his opponent leave, and then his body swayed as he vomited blood and began to fly off in the other direction. Senior, wait for me. Seeing this, Tangji hastily charged after that man in white, but that white figure moved as fast as lightning and was flying besides. There was simply no way Tangji could keep up. In the blink of an eye, he had vanished from Tangji's sight. The village chief and villagers of Little River Village looked up hopefully. The dust from the battle in the distance had settled, and the immortals were gone, leaving behind devastation. A figure walked out from the distance. Yaya's sharp eyes immediately recognized the person, and she shouted in joy, "It's Brother Ji. Brother Ji. It's Tangji. He's still alive." The villagers began to call out, and everyone rushed over to Tangji and began to pepper him with questions and see if he was okay. Once they saw that he was just a little dirty, they finally relaxed. "It's fine as long as you're still alive." Uncle Lin sighed in relief and laughed. Yaya hugged Tangji and asked, "Brother Ji, did you run into an immortal?" Tangji shook his head, smiling. "I couldn't keep up with them. Even getting close was difficult. I failed." His tone was very calm, and his smile very sincere, but everyone could hear the unwillingness hidden behind that smile. "Failure is failure, but at least you're still alive." "That's right, that's right. What could be more important than living?" "Little G, I'm not criticizing you, but you should get a hold of yourself and stop thinking about immortals and such. A meeting with immortals is difficult to find, and the gate to immortals is difficult to enter. Seeking out an immortal to attain the Tao is not something poor people like us can think about." "That's right. It's best for people like us to keep to our roles." "Right, Little G. Why don't you buy back those 3 fields of yours? I'll go and talk with old Jiang about it. He'll definitely agree." For a moment, everyone was giving their opinions. There were some who were giving earnest advice, others who were mocking him, some who were comforting him, and others who viewed his conduct with disdain. Uncle Lee was blunter with his words. "Brat, You would even give up your life to seek immortality? I was just working toward what I aspired to. Even if it caused your death? Yes, in this age, there are many people with dreams, but too few of them are willing to pay the price for their dreams. Uncle Lee had not expected a mere child to say such words, and he was rendered speechless. Even though Tangji's first attempt to seek an immortal had failed, he did not regret it. This was because he had tried for it, done his utmost, even put his life on the line. So long as he was striving for his dream, even if he failed, he would feel no regret. Rather than growing discouraged, he felt even more driven to seek out the path of immortality. Tangji mentally swore, "One day, I will be like them and travel freely across the heavens, no matter how many untold difficulties I must face." After this incident, the people of Little River Village returned to their ordinary lives, ceaselessly tending to their fields. Every day, Tangji would join the rest in setting out in the morning and returning at dusk. It appeared as if he had given up on his unrealistic fantasies, but whenever he was free, Tangji would go alone to the summit of Jade Orchid Mountain, quietly sitting there and looking up at the sky in a daze. The trees destroyed by the battle began to grow back. In this world of abundant spiritual energy, life was abnormally tough and tenacious. In just a few days, the summit was once more covered in green, the rising jade once more meeting the setting sun that cast its light over this land and painted Tangji's body a faint golden hue. He was like a statue erected at the summit. A month went by in the blink of an eye. The farm work was done, but Tangji continued to go up the mountain every day. Going up the mountain had already become a habit for him, and the villagers could only mentally sigh at this sight. Today, Tangji spent another day on the mountain, and by the time he came back, it was already dusk. When he got to his home, he found that Yaya was waiting for him at the door. The little girl looked at him with her large and bright eyes, softly muttering, "You went up to the mountain again?" Tangji grunted before moving to enter his house. Yaya pulled him back. "Brother Tang, what are you doing? Everyone in the village says you've gone crazy. The immortals are gone, but you still go up to the mountain every day. What's the point?" The people in the village had already asked him this question many times. Tangji had never answered. But today, after some hesitation, Tangji answered, "In that battle, I saw that the man in white was injured. Injured very badly." "How do you know that he was injured badly?" "Because he didn't go after that other man." "I think that it wasn't because he didn't want to do it, but because he couldn't," Tangji answered. So I think that he might not have gone very far. For him, the best plan would be to immediately find a place nearby to treat his wounds. "So you go up to the mountain every day to see if you can find him? You still haven't given up?" Yaya's little face turned red from agitation. "I've never given up," Tangji lightly said. "Even if I still fail, I still won't give up. In another year, I will leave this place to see the world and find an immortal." For Tangji, his month searching the mountain for clues was just another failure to find an immortal. 2 failures was far from enough to make him give up. Dreams were something that should be tirelessly pursued even if one failed countless times. Yaya was so angered by Tangji's words that she was on the verge of tears. She suddenly raised her hand and slapped Tangji. It was a stinging pain. "Tangji, you bastard!" Yaya shouted for all she was worth, then turned around and ran away. As Tangji watched her run away, he sighed and silently apologized. He had never intended to hurt a girl's feelings, particularly this little girl who loved him. He was internally conflicted and wondered if he should go after her and say a few comforting words. But he feared that this would only make her more attached to him. As he was hesitating, he heard the sound of horse hooves in the distance, and saw a rising plume of dust. Judging by the size of the dust trail and the thundering of the hooves, a lot of people were coming. A moment later, a force of men seething with killing intent appeared in the distance, their figures large and muscular, and though they had no armor, they all wielded sharp sabers. The leading men were holding short bows that they aimed in his general direction. Tangji was shocked and immediately got down. Ever since he had been stabbed to death in his last life, Tangji would instinctively get down whenever someone aimed a weapon at him. This reaction saved his life. As he got down, he heard the twang of a bow, and a sharp arrow brushed past his scalp and nailed itself into the wooden house behind him, the tail still quivering. Horse bandits. Tangji flipped over and jumped to his feet. rushing to the back of the house as he loudly shouted, "Bandits are coming!" The horse bandits of the Wild Grain Plains, Anyang Prefecture, was swarming with bandits that robbed and plundered wherever they pleased. They were cruel and violent, butchering entire villages and sparing nothing. Of them, the Wild Grain Plain horse bandits were the cruelest. Tangji had heard rumors about them, but he had never imagined that they would come upon his village. As he loudly shouted and evaded, he heard another twang. One of the horse bandits had loosed an arrow at Yaya. "Yaya, get down!" Tangji roared. But the little girl was not as quick to react as Tangji, and the sudden appearance of bandits had already paralyzed her with fear. Plush! The arrow pierced through her chest, and Yaya's body swayed and then thudded to the ground. A moment later, hundreds of bandits swarmed into the village, their leader a tall and muscular man wielding a 9-ringed saber. He pointed ahead and shouted, "Kill! Kill everyone you can, and steal everything you can." No. Yaya's death caused Tangji to howl in pain. He saw that the bandits had already charged into the village and raised their sabers against the unprepared villagers. Blood swiftly began to spurt into the air. A hunter raised up the knife and fork in his hands, but there was no way he could stop a mounted bandit. A saber flashed, and the hunter swiftly had his head removed from his shoulders. Most of the villagers ran around in panic, but the horse bandits rode them down, using spears to penetrate through their backs and sabers to cut off their heads. The bandits shouted and laughed, sparing no one, not even the old or young. Little Tiger, Nanny Who, Uncle He, hiding behind his house, Tangji watched as the villagers were slaughtered, and his mind grew frenzied with rage. Uncle Lee ran out of the house next door. Upon seeing his daughter collapsed in a pool of blood, he cried out and rushed over. "Don't come out!" Tangji urgently shouted. A horse bandit saw Uncle Lee and charged over with a savage smile. "Bastard!" Tangji gritted his teeth and charged at the bandit, taking out his dagger and flinging it at the bandit. The bandit reacted quickly, swinging his saber and accurately striking the dagger in midair. His horse rammed into Uncle Lee, and the saber came down, taking Uncle Lee's life. The bandit turned his attention to Tangji, laughing as he said, "Still one more." He turned his horse in Tangji's direction. Tangji saw that the situation was grim, and began to run to the forest, seeking out that deserted trail. But the horse moved quickly, and the bandit didn't need long to catch up to Tangji and swing down his saber. Just when it was about to hit, Tangji lunged forward, avoiding the blow. He quickly turned around with another object in his hand, the rake from his backyard. This rake swung at the bandit's waist. Not having expected a 12-year-old boy to strike in this way, the bandit was caught off guard. The 9 points of the rake dug into his body, causing him to hiss in pain. The horse turned its head and rammed into Tangji, sending him flying. Tangji could feel that his ribs were probably broken, and he collapsed on the ground in pain. The bandit pulled out the rake, jumped off his horse, and savagely stalked toward Tangji. "Foul brat, you're dead." He considered himself a veteran warrior who could hold his own against 3 or 5 strong men. He had never imagined that he would be wounded today by some little brat. His heart burning with rage, he was determined to tear this boy apart. Tangji saw the man striding over, and then he suddenly raised his hand, obscuring the bandit's eyes with dust. He lunged forward with all his strength, and because the bandit's waist was injured, the bandit had naturally bent down a little, giving Tangji's mouth access to the throat. The bandit groaned in pain, and his saber swung at Tangji's back. But horse sabers needed space to exhibit their full might, and they were much less effective in such close quarters. Tangji was determined to fight to the death, so he allowed the edge of the saber to cut at his back and continued to doggedly bite down on the bandit's throat. The bandit began to panic, and he gathered up all his strength and tried to push Tangji away. But to his surprise, this move also took his life. Using the power of this push, Tangji ripped out the bandit's windpipe, blood gushed out, and the bandit gripped his throat and staggered a few steps before dropping to the ground. Tangji also came crashing down to the ground. He had taken a saber blow to the back, had been struck by a horse, and then had been pushed away by the bandit, so his injuries were dire. But he still went up to that bandit and snatched the saber from his hand. The bandit was not completely dead yet, and his eyes were wide open as they stared at Tangji. Tangji coldly said, "What are you looking at, beast?" The saber swept across the bandit's throat. Thud. Tangji vomited blood and weakly leaned against a tree. Although he had killed someone for the first time, he felt not one trace of fear. All he had was infinite hatred for these dregs of humanity. Suddenly, a voice rumbled like thunder through the firmament. "Audacious bandits, slaughtering innocents, die." Chapter 3, Killing in Rage. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. Following the roar, a slender white figure appeared in the distance, rapidly flying toward the village. This was clearly the white-clothed immortal that Tangji had failed to find. His appearance at this time was truly unexpected. "It's an immortal. Everyone, retreat!" The bandit chief immediately shouted. By the time he was shouting the first word, that white figure had just appeared at the end of the village's road, his white robes floating, his eyebrows raised as his sword emerged from his sheath. By the time he was shouting retreat, the figure had already gone up to a bandit. The sword fell, a head flew, and blood gushed into the air. In that straightforward fashion, he confronted the bandits, and the brash horse bandits immediately fled like stray dogs. The bandit chief shouted. The Black Sand group was ignorant and did not know this place was guarded by an immortal. "We are willing to withdraw, so please, immortal, stay your hand." The Wild Grain Plain bandits were very sharp and shrewd. They could cause trouble for the heavens and the earth, but definitely not for any place protected by an immortal. They had already scouted out Little River Village, and knew that it had no connection to an immortal. This was why they had been so bold as to strike. But to their surprise, they ended up running into an immortal anyway. His power, speed, and the swing of his sword placed him at least at the mortal shedding realm, as a true spirit master who had broken free of mortality. Moreover, he killed with decisiveness, with sword arts swift and vicious. There was a more than 50% chance that he was a sword cultivator who cultivated the art of killing. This was not something that a mere numerical advantage could deal with, which was why the chief pleaded for mercy. The white-clothed man snorted. "The bandits of the Black Sand group were wiped out 3 days ago." "Where did this other Black Sand group come from?" "Sihai has plagued the nearby villages for more than just a day, slaughtering entire villages and committing countless crimes." "Sihai, why is it that you dare to do the deed but not confess to it?" As he spoke, he killed 3 more bandits, truly killing humans as easily as one would butcher pigs. When that bandit chief called Psihai heard the white-clothed man exposing him, he immediately knew that there would be no mercy. His face twisted with savagery. "You immortals take up the most territory and the most resources. You claim to be dragons protecting the world, but you're really just seizing its wonders for yourself, fattening yourselves at its expense while bringing down misfortune on us mortals. Is there any way for us mortals to survive?" There's no need to keep up appearances with this old man in a place like this. Even if he's a spirit master, so long as his Violet Palace isn't open yet, he's not unkillable. His words were damning. Cultivation had 5 major realms, let alone the 4th realm. The Violet Palace realm, the 2nd realm, the Mortal Shedding realm, was not something 100-some bandits could deal with. On the other end, the white-clothed man couldn't retort to Psihai's words. He only slightly frowned and sighed. Bandits had always lived with their lives on the line, and when they saw that this man wasn't letting them go, they turned savage, answering Psihai's call and lunging at the immortal. Spiritual energy pervaded the world. Immortals could use this energy to cultivate and improve themselves. And while mortals did not have the methods for cultivation, they could strengthen their bodies by spending long periods of time immersed within it. Though these bandits were mortals, they had been nurtured by spiritual energy. They had powerful physiques and were practiced martial artists who had battled for many years and possessed vicious tactics. Tangji had been able to kill one mostly due to luck, with a small part being that his opponent had underestimated him. Thus, when they all charged together, even that white-clothed man wasn't able to kill all of them at once. Weapons flashed in the air as a brawl ensued. Meanwhile, that Psihai quietly sneaked away. He had called on the others to throw away their lives, but he himself was making a run for it. He was well aware that what made immortals truly terrifying was not their weapon arts, but their magic spells. Because of this, This battle was hopeless. A moment later, the man in white grunted, and his sword erupted with a brilliant light that was about a foot long. This light swept around in a circle, after which the heads of 10 some bandits rolled to the ground. It's an immortal sword art. The bandits yelped in unison, fear and despair in their eyes. At this moment, the man in white suddenly grunted again, and his body trembled, a blood stain appearing on his white robes. Xianxia was stunned at first, and then he shouted in glee. He's injured. He was injured before this. All of the bandits were invigorated by these words, and like a drowning man clutching a straw, they heedlessly lunged at the white-clothed man. Sure enough, the man's wounds had started making trouble again. He could no longer circulate energy as smoothly, and his movements were no longer light and easy. Some of the bandits began to fire at the man from a distance with bows and crossbows. HMPH, scoundrels. The man angrily grunted. These bandits were truly lacking in experience, believing that just because an immortal was injured, they could deal with one. In truth, a normal injury would have had minimal effect on a cultivator. But sometimes, ignorance and fearlessness would allow one to get extremely lucky. This man in white had not suffered some light wound. Even 1 month had only been enough to recover a little. However, in using that sword art just now, he had stimulated the wound, and he could now feel the spiritual energy in his body seething like a turbulent ocean, threatening to explode out of his body. He knew that if he didn't end this battle now, he would probably die here. However, his spiritual energy was difficult to control at the moment, rendering him unable to use any immortal arts. If they had all scattered in fear, the white-clothed man could have relied on his skills to kill them one at a time. But now that they were all rushing up and surrounding him, he had no way to get out. Moreover, his injuries were worsening, so if he did not take care of these human dregs soon, he would probably be the one in trouble. It would truly be like a ship overturning in placid waters. It seems I'll have to do this, the man in white thought to himself. Looking around at the bandits attacking him, his eyes suddenly released a stream of divine light. This is Xianxia, who had been cautiously observing the man in white this entire time, noticed something was wrong. He saw that sliver of divine light, and a much renowned term appeared in his mind. Divine sense. This was divine sense. Xianxia was aghast. This man wasn't in the mortal shedding realm, but the celestial heart realm. At this moment, he completely gave up on trying to kill the immortal and began to flee with all his might, no longer caring about what happened behind him. Wherever the white-clothed man's eyes went, the bandits would grab their heads and howl in pain. They dropped from their horses, blood gushing out from their eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. A divine sense attack covered an enormous range, and mortals simply had no way of stopping it. But for some reason, the man in white restricted his attack to several dozen meters around. Xianxia had fled early, escaping the range of the attack. In addition, the divine sense attack aimed only at humans, not horses, so his horse continued to ride away with him. However, the aftershocks from the divine sense attack left him in great pain, his brain feeling as if it was being jabbed by needles. The immense pain caused him to miserably howl. As he fled, a youth charged out from the side and threw a saber at Xianxia's back. Hearing the sound of rushing wind behind him, Xianxia tilted his head to the side. He avoided the lethal blow, the tip of the saber brushing past his head, but he ended up with an ear cut off. As he madly howled, the horse brought Xianxia away. Seeing that he couldn't catch up, Xianxia helplessly stopped. He looked back at the man in white, who was simply standing there after making his attack. On this day, the person he had fruitlessly sought had finally appeared. He had flown down from the heavens and faced down that group of murderous bandits, killing to his heart's content and leaving rivers of blood in his wake. Not a single bandit had been able to withstand the might of his sword. Those brash, arrogant, and fearless bandits had been felled by the man's sword, one by one, blood raining down as the survivors covered their heads and fled like rats. That white figure, the dazzling sword beams as swift as lightning, the rain of blood, all of these scenes had imprinted themselves on Xianxia's heart. The scale of this battle was much smaller than that battle of two immortals in the heavens, but it had left an even deeper impression on Xianxia. Even after many years, it would remain an indelible mark in Xianxia's mind. Not even Godhead Palace's divine connection, paramount majesty, or the domineering and peerless only I am the truth of the Annihilation King could overcome the heroic figure of Xianxia sweeping through the bandits with his sword. This was how an immortal should be, wielding a sword and scourging evil. But it was also on this day that Little River Village was slaughtered. Blood flowed through Little River Village, dyeing Tangji's field of vision red. Tangji felt like his life was mocking him. On this day, he had experienced life's greatest rise and greatest fall, both joy and sorrow. He had been stupefied, his emotions thrown into absolute turmoil as he wondered what he should do. He turned round and looked again at the man in white. Plush. The man in white vomited blood, and then he limply fell to the ground, unconscious. On this very same day, Tangji saw an immortal fall. With this, he understood that even immortals could die. Perhaps it was due to this understanding that came from seeing an immortal fall that he developed a most audacious and unprecedented plan. Chapter 4. Tricking an Immortal. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. When Xianxia woke up, the stars were already twinkling in the night sky. Nearby, a bonfire burned, the light illuminating a young boy that was sitting next to him. As he was about to sit up, the boy pushed him back down. Don't move. I just applied medicine to you. Medicine? What medicine? As Xianxia was just about to ask, he saw the medicine bottle in the boy's hand. White jade spread? Xianxia exclaimed. He could tell from the style of the bottle that it was his. Only now did he discover that all of the medicine he carried had been taken from him by the boy and was now placed at his feet. Who are you to dare to touch my possessions without permission? Xianxia was furious. The items cultivators carried on their bodies were often linked to their lives, and they could not be recklessly touched. His storage bag had been destroyed in the previous bottle, so he was carrying his items on his person. He had never imagined that some mortal boy would scour his body of everything. He immediately sat up, his right hand snatching at the air. In the distance, a simple and heavy copper mirror suddenly flew into his hand. As he had used spiritual energy, his blood roiled once more, and he vomited a large mouthful of blood. But Xianxia ignored this and put away the mirror, after which he grabbed at a jade writing strip beside him. This time, he did not use his long-range item seizing spell. The boy explained, I know that it's not good to look through the possessions of others, but both of us were injured. If I didn't use the medicine, we would both be dead. Xianxia realized that his wound was already slathered with a thick layer of white jade spread. It appeared that the boy had been reapplying medicine for him. The boy also had a layer of white jade spread over his back. White jade spread was a valuable medicine, and only a small amount was needed. Using it in the way the boy had was an enormous waste. Xianxia's tone softened. I see. But you were still a little too bold. Don't you know that while immortals carry medicines, if not used properly, they will do more harm than good? Not using the medicine will result in death, but using it incorrectly will also result in death. Surprisingly, the boy nodded and said, I know, so I took a look at your wound first. I thought that you probably applied medicine to your wound. This white jade spread you speak of is something I confirmed after comparing it against the medicine on your wound multiple times, so it should be the right one. Xianxia was speechless. It turned out that this boy had first looked at his wound before choosing a medicine. It was no wonder he had chosen white jade spread out of the many medicines in his possession. If not for the white jade spread, he probably wouldn't have woken up so quickly. Xianxia said, my injury appears to be an external injury, but it is actually because of tyrannical energy running through my body and upsetting my meridians. White jade spread can help me stabilize my spiritual energy and repair my meridians. I intentionally did not have that wound heal, as the bleeding will actually make the medicine work faster. But to treat your external injury, it is using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Moreover, the medicine is not fit for the illness. You should have used that bottle of patch cream next to you. Oh, I get it. I was wondering why an immortal's medicine was having a hard time healing a simple external wound. The boy appeared enlightened, snatching up that patch cream and spreading some on his back. Sure enough, he felt a refreshing chill on his back, and even the pain lessened. He had not asked the owner of this medicine if he could use it. Though Xianxia had thought about stopping him, he ultimately decided that since this boy had saved him, he would be a little too petty if he stopped the boy. Thus, he decided to let the matter go. The boy sat at his side and said, "My name is Tangji, the G, of calamity." In truth, he had already heard that golden-armored god call out this man's name, but he was pretending not to know. "Xumuiyang." Xumuiyang somewhat coldly replied. Tangji smiled at this answer. This answer meant that Xumuiyang had not noticed him in that previous battle. Of course, he could have noticed and not cared. In the eyes of an immortal, a mortal like him was like an ant. Who would pay much attention to an ant? Since that was so, it would make the rest of his work easier. Tangji. Xumuiyang mulled over the name, creasing his brow. "This name is too heavy with killing intent. It's inauspicious." Tangji smiled. "When I was born, it was during the dark cloud coup in the central plains, and there was also the calamity of the sunset clouds swallowing the moon. A fortune teller said that these were extremely inauspicious signs from the heavens. He said that I was born in response to disaster and that my life would be fraught with disaster. I would be a bane to my father, my mother, my friends, my wife, to all the people close to me. I would even be a bane to heavens, earth, all things in the world, and even the Tao of heaven, a bane to everything." Thus, the fortune teller advised my parents to call me Tangji so that my name could suffer the calamity in my place, perhaps turning disaster into fortune. Absurd. Xumuiyang shouted. "All things in the world cycle beneath the Tao of heaven, and even the sacred immortals can only gaze up at it. The mysteries of heaven are unfathomable, so who would dare to speak so brazenly about banes?" This fortune teller was a wicked deceiver who spoke only nonsense. He should have been beaten to death. He wasn't beaten to death, but he was beaten. Despite this, though, my parents ultimately decided to give me this name. 2 years ago, I encountered a great calamity. Both of my parents died, and I died and then came back to life. Perhaps this was the disaster that my name suffered in my place, Tangji casually said. To be frank, he didn't know if Tangji had transmigrated into Tangji's body, or if Tangji was some sort of reincarnation of Tangji. But regardless, in this life, he was Tangji. After some thought, Xumuiyang asked, "Did you belong to Little River Village?" Tangji shook his head. "I was only passing by. I just so happened to see you kill all the bandits and then fall unconscious." As he spoke, he patted the readied bundle at his side and then began to sort out the medicines on the ground, using this boozy work to conceal his nervousness. He was nervous not merely because he was lying, but because he was lying to an immortal. This was his first meeting with an immortal. But on this first meeting, he was deceiving an immortal. This was audacious to the extreme. But he had no other choice. When Tangji saw that white-clothed immortal appear, he knew that his moment had come. The gate to immortality was difficult to find. Many mortals sought to become immortals, but few succeeded. Even if one managed to encounter an immortal, immortals rarely offered instruction. He had been bitterly searching for an immortal, but now that he had found one, there was no guarantee the immortal would accept him as a disciple. However, Tangji was well aware of how important it was to step onto the path of immortality, and even if there was only a 1 in 10,000 chance, he had to try. Though he had saved Xumuiyang, Xumuiyang had killed the bandits and saved him. In other words, Xumuiyang didn't really owe him. On the contrary, if not for this battle, Xumuiyang's old injuries would not have started acting up. In truth, Tangji owed more to Xumuiyang. It was precisely for this reason that he could not admit that he was someone from Little River Village. He wanted this immortal to owe him a favor. Only then could he have a chance at becoming an immortal. For this little bit of chance, he could chase and pursue, even give up his life. So naturally, he could lie. It was fortunate that he had come out when Xumuiyang was already unconscious and had not noticed him. Moreover, from their conversation just now, Tangji had determined that Xumuiyang had not noticed his presence in the earlier battle, either. Thus, it was completely possible to say that he had just been passing through. The only thing he did not dare to be certain of was if Xumuiyang, as an immortal, would be able to sense if he was lying. This was a gamble that the human mind was unfathomable, that not even immortals had the ability to read the minds of others. At least not all of them. Tangji was determined to take this bet. If he won, he could have an immortal owe him a favor. If he lost, it was just a small lie. not enough to get him the death penalty. This was an immortal who punished the wicked, so he wouldn't just kill him because of a lie. And besides, what would it matter if he were killed? Become an immortal or die trying. The calamity that had befallen the villagers of Little River Village had let Tangji clearly understand how miserable it was to live the life of an ant. Tangji was willing to go to any lengths to alter this fate. Sure enough, Xianxia was clearly taken aback upon hearing that Tangji didn't belong to Little River Village. You don't belong to Little River Village? Then how did you get that wound on your back? That man you chased away on his horse. I couldn't dodge in time, so he got a hit on me with his saber, Tangji calmly said. Compared to the nervousness from his first lie, Tangji was much more composed with his second. The lie was not immediately exposed, meaning that Tangji had won his bet on the two most important points. Xianxia was stunned, and after a momentary daze, he replied, I see. Thank you for your assistance, little brother. Honored Immortal is a righteous and noble warrior, a slayer of bandits. What I have done is nothing in comparison. In the end, I was a step too late and could not save the people of Little River Village. I am sure that they are grateful that you avenged them, Tangji calmly replied, as if the people of Little River Village really had nothing to do with him. Upon seeing the look on his face, Xianxia had no more doubts. He could only sigh as he pondered the heavy karma he had brought on himself. When an immortal took on karma that could not be resolved, it would often leave a crack on their heart. While these cracks would not seem like anything, cultivators had to face 5 realms and 14 tiers, and one tier was the heart demon tier. If the heart had a crack, a heart demon would emerge from it, and if the cracks were innumerable, so would the heart demons be. When that time came, even if one possessed outstanding cultivation, there would be no salvation. For this reason, all those who sought the Tao had to be very careful about this matter. What one needed to pay attention to was that heart demons had nothing to do with virtue, nor was it a matter of you saved me, so I must repay you. And it was also not the case that every incident would seed karma that would bear fruit. It was connected to one's character and convictions. If Tangji had helped some devil who followed the principle of the strong eating the weak, who returned kindness with enmity, then even if this man immediately killed Tangji, there would be no heart demon, for this man would have followed his convictions. In killing Tangji, he would have verified his Tao. On the contrary, not killing would have created a heart demon. From this, one could see that heart demons did not care about good or evil, only about what cultivators did on their path to immortality that went against their will and convictions, and led to mental contradictions. It was also for this reason that cultivators were often very firm in their convictions. Once they attached themselves to an ideal or point of view, their minds were not easily changed. If they suddenly changed their minds, they might feel regret over their past actions, and this was how heart demons were born. A heart was difficult to change, and even if one had forgotten what was done in the past, the heart would remember, and thus heart demons were born. Xianxia had been born in a great clan, and though he was not some benevolent sage, he held the viewpoint that kindness must be returned. Since someone had lent a helping hand, he had to repay it no matter what. He took out a bottle of pills and placed it in Tangji's hand. This is a bottle of spirit-nurturing pills. These can nourish the spiritual organs and strengthen one's spirit. Even if a mortal takes them, they can still strengthen the body and cure illness. You helped me, so you can take these pills. In addition, you can also take that bottle of patch cream. Karmic debts had to be settled, but there was an art to it. Cultivators had long lives with countless experiences and all sorts of karmic debts burdening them. If they treated them all earnestly, they would never get anything else done. Thus, cultivators had their own ways of resolving their problems. The simplest way was like this: gifting a bottle of spirit medicine. There was no need to worry about whether it was enough. Heart demons came from one's heart, and if one believed that the compensation was enough and felt no regret, there was no problem. Thus, selective ignorance, self-deception, and self-consolation became necessary lessons for cultivators. But if someone were to point out and expose these tricks, a few words would be enough for the strategy to fall apart and for a heart demon to be incited. In battles between immortals, this was how one could win with words. It was for the same reason that cultivators rarely spoke about their personal experiences. so that they did not expose any weaknesses. Xianxia was clearly lacking when it came to deceiving himself. For this reason, his first offer had been a bottle of first-rate spirit-nurturing pills. Shameless, black-hearted fellow, I'm even paying you back for the white jade spread you used up. Tangji was a rather sharp person. He was no immortal, but he had lied without shame, and he had little interest in these pills, putting them down and lightly saying, I don't want them. He didn't understand heart demons, but he knew about favors. From a certain perspective, they were the same thing. Xianxia wanted to return a favor with a bottle of pills. Absolutely not. Seeing that he didn't want it, Xianxia hastily said, if you don't think it's enough, Tangji stood up. I simply helped you in the passing, and there is no need for honored mortal to be so concerned. Right, I saw that you were coming from the east, so I presume that you were headed for Anyang Prefecture. I happen to be going there too, so why not accompany me? Honored Immortal is injured, and there might be many inconveniences on the road that I can help you with. Of course, Tangji had no idea where Xianxia was going, but Anyang Prefecture was up the road, so there was nothing wrong with saying that Tangji was going to Anyang Prefecture. So long as he could follow this man, Tangji was in no rush on the matter of seeking instruction in cultivation. His many years in bureaucracy had made him understand that if one wanted to cling to the leg of someone else, one first had to win the owner's favor. On the other end, Xianxia wanted to cry. If only you had just stopped at saying that you were just helping in the passing and didn't mind. Xianxia would have just hardened up and comforted himself by saying that this boy didn't want a reward, and as the boy hadn't suffered any sort of loss, the karmic debt would have been settled. But then, the boy had added that they should travel together, thus creating a problem. The boy had helped him, so if he refused, he would seem too cold, thus going against his heart. Cultivators could do anything except go against their heart. In truth, he really could just leave. The heart demon created from such a trivial matter was not guaranteed to do anything to him. After all, the heart demon tribulation was formed from the accumulation of one's actions across one's lifetime. But settling karmic debts and taking actions that did not go against one's heart was a habit that all cultivators would develop. This was like opening shop every day. Whether one had a little or a lot of business, each day had to be taken seriously. After thinking it over, Xianxia decided to accept this request. In his view, this was just a 12-year-old boy who would need his help at some point. When the time came, he would settle this karmic debt. Upon learning that Xianxia was willing to travel with him, Tangji happily smiled. The door of opportunity was wide open, and so all he needed to do was hold it fast. The heavens had sent him to this world but had not given him any sort of cheat. He would just create one himself. Chapter 5. A karmic debt is hard to resolve. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. A gravestone was set up in front of Little River Village. This was a grave for the whole population of Little River Village. All that was written on it was, the 138 villagers of Little River Village are buried here. There were no names, for Tangji was not a member of Little River Village. He could not write down the names, for he should not have known them. Standing in front of the grave, Tangji was emotionless. No, there was a sliver of sympathy and rage. These were emotions that any normal person would feel after experiencing such a tragedy, but these were not emotions one who belonged to Little River Village would have. Tangji utilized his anger well to mask his pain. Thus, no matter how closely Xianxia looked, he wouldn't see the expected sorrow on Tangji's face. There was no way a 12-year-old boy could conceal his emotions. Xianxia had to give up on this fantasy. After glancing one last time at Yaya's grave, Tangji turned around. Let's go. Tangji set off first, and while Xianxia was still behind him, he took the chance to silently cry. It was a distance of more than 100 li between Little River Village and Anyang Prefecture. At Xianxia's usual speed, he could have reached it easily, but he wasn't fully recovered and had the burden of Tangji, so they could only walk. Fortunately, Tangji managed to find a few horses out in the fields that had originally belonged to the bandits. He then found a flatbed cart in the village and attached the horses to them, thus making a flatbed carriage that the two of them could sit on. Tangji tied a few more horses to the back of the cart and loaded them with some of the better weapons, claiming that they could sell them once they got to Anyang Prefecture. Though immortals did not lack for supplies, Tangji clearly had no intention of relying on Xianxia for food and drink, but was intending to rely on himself. Since they were traveling, they had to occasionally converse, deepening their understanding of each other. Tangji fabricated a background, saying he had come from Sunwood Village on the other side of Jade Orchid Mountain, and he was heading to Anyang Prefecture to look for work. Though he was only 12, in this world, a 12-year-old boy could already do some work, and it wasn't rare to see them working alone. As for Sunwood Village, Tangji had been there before, so if Xianxia interrogated him, he could answer any questions. However, Xianxia didn't ask any more questions, completely believing Tangji's story. However, Xianxia kept his own background mysterious, only saying that he was a cultivator who had long ago forgotten about mortal affairs and was no longer willing to bring them up. As for the address of Honored Immortal, Tangji was asked to no longer use it and to instead call him True Person. He didn't want to say much, but Tangji had a variety of questions. Why should I address you as True Person and not Honored Immortal? Because I am not an immortal. Only someone who has mounted the Immortal Platform can even be considered a semi-immortal. What is the Immortal Platform? The Immortal Platform is the fifth realm of cultivation. And what does fifth realm mean? Cultivation consists of 5 major realms: Spirit Platform, Mortal Shedding, Celestial Heart, Violet Palace, and Immortal Platform. At the fifth realm, one can convert spiritual energy into immortal essence, thus becoming an Earth Immortal. Then what are the Spirit Platform, Mortal Shedding, Celestial Heart, and Violet Palace? And what is an Earth Immortal? The more Xianxia answered, the more questions Tangji asked. His first impression of Tangji was that this boy was very talented, someone who was capable despite his young age. But now, he felt that a child was still a child, still innocent and ignorant. The ignorance was real, but the innocence was naturally faked. Tangji had been born with the ability to act cute and ignorant. The immature feared nothing, and no question was off limits. Xianxia felt helpless, and while he answered a few at first, he decided to just feign deafness after that. Even so, Tangji managed to learn a lot. Cultivation was divided into 5 realms. In the first 4 realms, one was considered a cultivator or an immortal aspirant. Only in the last realm could one be considered to have entered the Immortal Path and earn the appellation of immortal. In the first realm, the Spirit Platform realm, one could be called a cultivator disciple, but to be called a spirit master would be overstepping one's bounds. Though the immortal domain seemed very messy, it was actually very strictly regulated. Those of the Spirit Platform realm were called Spirit Disciples, those of the Mortal Shedding realm called Spirit Masters, those of the Celestial Heart realm called True Persons, those of the Violet Palace realm called True Lords or Celestial Sovereigns, and those of the Immortal Platform realm called Immortals. The common people knew nothing of this and called all cultivators immortals. The immortals did not make a fuss over this, but among themselves, they were very clear about the differences. Anyone who dared to call themselves a true person while not at the Celestial Heart realm would be asking for trouble. As for Xianxia, he was a true person of the Celestial Heart realm. Tangji was astonished to hear that this Celestial Heart realm true person who had flattened a mountain top was only in the middle of the pack. What sort of abilities would someone at the Violet Palace realm or Immortal Platform realm have? Then, it was a good thing that he didn't say it out loud, or else Xianxia might have given him a good thrashing. Middle of the pack. Did he know how difficult cultivation was? In the Rosy Cloud domain, the Celestial Heart realm, while not top class, was still high in the ranks. As for the Violet Palace realm, those were existences who could found their own sects. Immortal Platform realm cultivators were legendary existences. At this level, cultivators could breach the protective stellar winds and wander around the world beyond. For this reason, Celestial Heart realm cultivators could be described as the backbone of the Rosy Cloud domain's cultivator strength. And it was precisely because he was a Celestial Heart true person that he could use divine sense to kill people without leaving a mark. It was just that his heavy injuries had even damaged his divine sense, causing his attack range to shrink. Besides this, Tangji learned that Xianxia was not a native of the Sage Heart Kingdom. He was from the Nadia Hill Kingdom. Rosy Cloud was home to beasts with the appearance of tapirs. They were born with 3 eyes, could move as fast as lightning, had vicious personalities, and made cries akin to a wailing infant. Killing was second nature for them. In the 733rd year of Tanjing, the Guangfa celestial sovereign battled one of these vicious, 3-eyed tapirs on an island in the far west. After 3 days of battle, he slew the tapir and turned it into a spirit hill that joined the island to the continent. This hill was called Tapir Hill, and was later known as Nadia Hill. This was the origin story of the Nadia Hill Kingdom. Sage Heart was in the far east, and Nadia Hill was in the far west. Xianxia had come all the way from the west to east, and Tangji would never believe it if he said that he had just come to sightsee. Given what had happened before, the answer was obvious. He had come here fleeing for his life. Put bluntly, this was an immortal in dire straits. An immortal in dire straits was still an immortal, so Tangji privately told himself, I can't shun him. With the cart, they could cover more than 100 li in a day. Tangji drove the cart, while Xianxia didn't need to do anything except stay in the back and care for his wounds. In this time, Tangji even helped Xianxia apply some more medicine, ensuring that Xianxia had nothing to worry about. At dusk, the two of them arrived at Anyang Prefecture. Xianxia wanted to quickly resolve this karmic debt, so he took Tangji to the finest establishment in the city, Phoenix Pavilion. Although resolving karmic debt with a fine meal was rather cheap, it was much better than burdening himself like this. Frankly speaking, resolving karmic debt was merely a matter of doing something that one would not regret. It was impossible for one to not feel any regret or remorse in one's life, but at least one could reduce or minimize these things. A minor trifle like this was naturally nothing at all. With this thought in mind, Xianxia only ordered the most expensive foods, not the tastiest, and the two of them enjoyed themselves. But when the time came to settle the bill, Xianxia flipped through his belongings and realized that he didn't have any money. Xianxia's wealth had been destroyed in the last battle, and even his storage bag had been lost. At the time, he had only managed to save the most important medicines and treasures, but when it came to money, he had not taken a single coin. For mortals, money was a #1 priority that could never be forgotten. But in the eyes of cultivators like Xianxia, money was a worthless thing that was hardly worth the trouble. Moreover, he normally brought spirit foods, so he had no expenses to speak of. As a result, he had momentarily forgotten about this matter. This matter still shouldn't have presented a problem to him. When he normally walked the mortal world, he would only need to reveal his identity to have rich merchants, officials, and local figureheads falling over themselves to give him money. Even the king of Sage Heart would be polite to him, and so long as he didn't come to find trouble, even the official sect of the Sage Heart Kingdom, the Basking Moon sect, would treat him with respect. Gifts of money, any money gifted to me would be trying to humiliate me. But things were different now. He was being pursued by someone and needed to be inconspicuous. Exposing himself at Jade Orchid Mountain didn't matter, but now that he had left the mountain, he could no longer be so obvious. Since he couldn't reveal his identity, he suddenly realized that he had no means of getting money. Would he have to study the way of those lowly thieves and steal from others? Or would he have to do some dine and dashing? That was just too humiliating. Tangji could see how conflicted he was, and said, "Eat. There's no need to worry. When I went out just now, I spoke with the manager. We can pay for this meal with a horse." Xianxia's face went red. "How did you know that I didn't have any money? Did you forget that I already searched your body?" Tangji answered. After dinner, Tangji really did hand off a horse to the manager. The horses ridden by these bandits differed in quality, and not all of them had been excellent steeds. However, the ones Tangji had selected were the best, and each one could be exchanged for 40 tals of silver. In this world, a single tal of silver had the purchasing power of 1,000 yuan back in his original world. Xianxia's dinner had cost 40,000 yuan, a truly extravagant feast. After this was done, Tangji said, "If we keep this up, we'll end up broke after a few meals. Let's be a little more conservative after this." Xianxia's face reddened, and he could only nod. He was a mighty cultivator, a celestial heart realm true person. No matter where he went, he would be a first-rate individual, but now, he was being taught lessons by a little boy. This was truly absurd. Tangji had brought 6 horses, and he still had 5 left. He sold them all to a merchant, exchanging them for 180 tals of silver. Tangji had also taken the money off the bodies of the dead bandits, but alas, the bandits were all poor, with their weapons being their greatest assets. The bodies of 100-some bandits had only turned up 10 tals of silver, but after selling off their weapons, he was able to scrape together 200 tals of silver, a considerable sum. Since Xianxia didn't have money, Tangji naturally had to pay for the lodgings as well. Staying in the room that Tangji had rented for him, Xianxia grew even more miserable. He had believed that once they were at Anyang Prefecture, Tangji would have to rely on him for his livelihood, but the opposite turned out to be true. Knowing that he was dependent on Tangji for food and lodging while Tangji depended on him for nothing left Xianxia with an extremely unpleasant feeling. How was it that he had not only failed to repay the favor, but now owed even more? Xianxia felt very vexed by his situation. He normally spent every night quietly meditating, harmonizing his breathing and treating his injuries. But tonight, alone in his room, he could sense that his emotions were restless, unsuitable for meditation. Thus, he went out to the yard to practice the Visceral Manifestation Classic. The Visceral Manifestation Classic was a cultivation mantra that he had come upon, and it was precisely this incident that had forced him to flee for his life. As he was circulating his energy, he saw Tangji walk out of his room to stand nearby and watch. To watch a cultivator cultivate was the greatest taboo. Xianxia wanted to rebuke him, but when he thought about how this boy was young and didn't understand these rules, and also how Tangji had looked after him, he felt that driving him away would be too ungrateful. Unable to tell him to leave, Xianxia just let Tangji watch, thinking to himself that since this boy lacked the foundation or the corresponding cultivation arts, he wouldn't be able to get anything from the experience. At this time, he was utilizing his supreme self-consoling art. Chapter 6, The Visceral Manifestation Classic. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. As Xianxia got up in the early morning, he saw a bowl of silver ear fungus and lotus seed soup on the table in front of him, a kind of tonic. The inn could not possibly make this sort of breakfast for its guests, so Xianxia knew that it must have been Tangji who made it. Though this sort of lotus seed soup was useless at his level of cultivation, the good intentions were still there, and Xianxia felt rather comforted. Moreover, the soup was made well and had an excellent taste, and eating it was a delight. After breakfast, Tangji came to pay a visit to Xianxia and ask him where they were going next. This put Xianxia in a difficult spot. He was fleeing pursuit, so he had no fixed goal. He was just going wherever the wind took him. Anyang Prefecture was in the far east, and farther east was the endless sea. Was he going to flee to the islands? As if he could see Xianxia's hesitation, Tangji said, "If Spirit Master Xu doesn't need to go to any particular place, I have a suggestion. Why not buy a house? A quiet and peaceful place for you to recover." Buy a house? Xianxia was astonished. Yes, if it's a problem of money, Spirit Master Xu does not need to worry. I have some silver tals that should be enough to buy a small house. But that is your money. But those horses came from the bandits that Master Xu killed, so some of the money should be Master Xu's, Tangji said in a tone that was neither servile nor overbearing. While using the address of Spirit Master Xu, he had dropped the spirit, simply calling him Master Xu. Xianxia didn't notice this, hesitantly saying, "In the end, it's not proper for me to stay here for long." When you don't want to stay any longer, just sell it. Moreover, Master Xu is unwell and has no one to attend to you. I happened to come here to look for work, and I can attend to you in my free time, Tangji continued. Once they got to Anyang Prefecture, Tangji had confirmed that Xianxia had no set destination in mind. Since that was the case, he would just keep him here. He wanted to follow Xianxia and cultivate, so he had to remain at Xianxia's side. If Xianxia wanted to leave, he would follow, but if he couldn't find a good reason to travel together with him, Xianxia would sense that he had ulterior motives. Although his intentions would be exposed eventually, until their relationship had reached a certain level, this time was best delayed as long as possible. Since he couldn't follow the man, he might as well make him stay. Xianxia had no idea what was going through Tangji's mind and was still worrying over his karmic debt and owed favors. He thought to himself that if he really left, he would never be able to resolve this karmic debt, so he decided to listen to Tangji and stay. But even so, if Tangji bought the house he lived in, wouldn't he owe Tangji another favor? Or was it as Tangji said, and some share of the money was his? After some thought, he realized that this wasn't quite right. After all, he had chosen to ignore the horses. If someone else got rich off of them and he was still somehow owed a share, then weren't all the scavengers in the world about to get robbed? But if he didn't stay in that house, where would he stay? After all, Tangji was also paying for his room at the inn. He found it impossible to calculate the bill and only felt a headache coming on, so he decided to stop thinking about it and let Tangji handle everything. Tangji worked very efficiently, and in just 2 days, he had found a good house. The house was an old home downstream from the windscreen ford outside of Anyang Prefecture. The original owner had fallen on hard times and was selling it, and Tangji had bought it for 150 taels of silver. The procedure for buying a house was very simple. All one needed was to request some prestigious elder in the area to serve as an intermediary, and everything was done once the contract was signed and the money exchanged. The house was bought under the name of Tangji, but the elder wasn't listening carefully, so on the contract, he wrote Tangji. Tangji had intended to point this out, but a moment later, he decided that since he didn't understand this world very well, it would be safer to use a pseudonym. Thus, he let this matter go. Once the house was bought, Xianxia paid it a visit. He saw that while the house wasn't big, it was still a house with 6 rooms, including the main room and side room, and 2 gates. It was rather remote, but it had its back to a small hill and was fronted by willows and a river. This gave it the excellent feng shui of a mountain behind it and the water before it. It was a peaceful and beautiful place that left him satisfied. Also of note was that this place had abundant spiritual energy, making it the perfect place to rest and recover. Xianxia immediately realized that Tangji had not found some random house. After asking Tangji, he realized that Tangji truly had selected this house because of the area's abundance of spiritual energy. Xianxia was very curious about this. How did you know that this area had abundant spiritual energy? Tangji answered, this family once planted spirit grains for an immortal sect, but the later generations weren't interested in farming, leaving the lands abandoned. As this was a place that could grow spirit grains, it must have abundant spiritual energy. After all, immortals wouldn't choose a bad location. Moreover, this place is close to a road intersection, making things easier for you. In pointing out the numerous roads, he was naturally referring to how Xianxia was being hunted down and this would provide him more avenues of escape. Xianxia was thoroughly stunned by this reply. He looked at his room and found that it had already been swept clean. On the side was a study, and all the tools of a scholar were present. Outside of the room was the courtyard, which was perfect for quiet cultivation. This boy had handled everything neatly and cleanly. He finally began to look at Tangji in a different light. After some time, Xianxia finally nodded. Though he is young, his thoughts are very meticulous. He was finally finding this boy rather interesting and was no longer in such a rush to part ways with him. He vaguely sensed that if he stayed at this boy's side, his life would be much easier. From that day forward, Xianxia took up residence in this courtyard downstream of Windscreen Ford, and Tangji naturally took up residence as well. After all, he wasn't going to buy a house just for Xianxia to live in while he stayed in an inn. There wasn't much money left after they bought furnishings, and they couldn't just sit back and relax until their money ran out, so Tangji found work in Anyang Prefecture. During the day, he would head off to the city to work, and at night, he would return to the house to cook for Xianxia, wash the clothes, and clean the houses, taking care of all the housework. All Xianxia needed to do was quietly recover from his injuries. Occasionally, he would sit alone and fiddle around with the bronze mirror, closely inspecting it for something. But most of the time, he would just sigh. Tangji's work truly was saving him some effort. There were many small domestic trifles that Xumuiyang could never have imagined that Tangji would think of. With him here, Xumuiyang basically didn't need to worry about his needs. At some point, Xumuiyang grew accustomed to Tangji's service. When covered in many lice, one would cease to itch, and when mired in many debts, one would cease to worry about them. As time went on, Xumuiyang decided to stop thinking about his karmic debt. In the blink of an eye, the two of them had lived together for half a month, and were gradually beginning to know each other. On this night, Xumuiyang went out to the courtyard to cultivate the visceral manifestation classic as usual while Tangji watched on the side. The two of them already regarded this as routine. Once Xumuiyang was done cultivating the visceral manifestation classic and ceased circulating energy, Tangji served a cup of tea. Smiling, he said, "Congratulations, big brother Xu, for recovering from your injuries." Their relationship had deepened so much that he could call him Big Brother Xu. "I've only recovered 30% of my power." "How could you tell?" Xumuiyang asked. Tangji answered, "Whenever Big Brother Xu would cultivate the visceral manifestation classic before, you would only do 11 movements, but today, you did 12. From this, I can see that it wasn't that you didn't want to do it in the past, but that you didn't have the strength. Since you can do 12, it naturally means that your injuries are improving." That truly is the case. Xumuiyang was not surprised by Tangji's meticulous nature. Smiling, he explained, "The visceral manifestation classic has 12 forms and has the effect of increasing spiritual energy. Before this, I lacked in both energy and blood, so I didn't dare to perform the complete set of 12. Now that my condition is gradually improving, I can finally perform them all." Saying this, he looked at Tangji. "I must thank you for serving me so dutifully, allowing me to recover without worry. So when Big Brother Xu completes the visceral manifestation classic, you can drive out the domineering energy and completely recover?" Tangji excitedly said. "It's not that easy. The visceral manifestation is only a basic art and has little effect when it comes to healing injuries." "But isn't Big Brother Xu a true person of the celestial heart realm? Why do you have to restart from the foundations?" "Oh, I know. You must not have been a diligent student when you were little, so your foundation isn't good." "Nonsense," Xumuiyang angrily said. "Although this visceral manifestation classic is a basic art, it has an extraordinary background. It emphasizes the entranced mind that focuses on one's aspirations, the fusion of the body with the Tao, the essence contained within the blood, energy running through the 100 meridians, flowing smoothly and without obstruction." He immediately went on a big spiel, essentially saying that this visceral manifestation classic had mighty origins and amazing effects. He was so agitated that he even quoted some of the lines from the text. After speaking for a while, he suddenly realized what was going on and glared at Tangji. "Kid, you fooled me again." As he spent more and more time with Tangji, he gradually came to understand him. He wasn't ignorant at all, only feigning it. Every time he spoke with him, he would end up divulging something about the cultivation world. Thus, Tangji was no longer ignorant about cultivation and immortals, and he could even quote a few snatches from the visceral manifestation classic now. But Xumuiyang didn't care that much. After receiving Tangji's care and attention, he had begun to like the boy. Now that there was some affection between them, he naturally no longer bickered about the minor things. He had been fooled by Tangji, but in truth, he was willing to be fooled. In his view, the visceral manifestation classic was incredibly abstruse and difficult to cultivate. Even a true person of the celestial heart realm like him had a hard time realizing any effect, so there was no way Tangji could comprehend the complete cultivation method through the snatches he had heard. He was growing more and more skilled in his self-consoling art. Hearing Xumuiyang's rebuke, Tangji giggled, his expression like that of an innocent and pure child. But Xumuiyang didn't take the bait this time. After saying a few more words, he returned to his room to sleep. Watching Xumuiyang leave, Tangji put away his smile, his innocent and childish eyes turning deep and profound. He muttered to himself, "The entranced mind that focuses on one's aspirations, the fusion of the body with the Tao, engaging the organs and abandoning essence, energy running through the 100 meridians, flowing smoothly and without obstruction. He began to recite the words Xianxia had just spoken while repeating the movements, extending his arms and taking up an extremely strange posture. This was the first form of the visceral manifestation's 12 forms. Every night, once Xianxia went back to rest, Tangji would practice the visceral manifestation classic. This was the only thing he could practice. He had watched the first 11 forms of the visceral manifestation numerous times and had practiced each of them to perfection. Each time he did this, his body felt extremely relaxed and pleased, as if all the veins in his body had been opened up. But there was always something off at the end. This was because he was lacking the 12th form, which prevented him from getting the full effect. Today, he had learned the 12th form, and so once he finished the 11th form, he naturally moved on to the 12th. Although it was his first time using it, he moved with incredible grace and proficiency, as if his body had been waiting for this moment. He performed the movement as naturally as a river flowed. Tangji finally felt a weak pulse of energy from his energy cave point. Note: in Chinese acupuncture, the energy cave point is located a little bit beneath the navel. The visceral manifestation classic could allow him to sense spiritual energy. He was naturally elated, so he repeated the 12 forms again. Performing the movements of the visceral manifestation classic presented no difficulty to him. On the contrary, they became easier the more he did them, and the energy flow through his body improved. After the third repetition, his weak spiritual energy grew stronger and stronger until he was almost sure of its existence. Tangji was in the initial stage of cultivation and had no idea of its challenges and dangers. In his excitement, he continued to repeat the process, and the flow of energy grew stronger and stronger, until he began to feel something swelling in his abdomen. Tangji finally realized that something was wrong, and hastily stopped. The moment he stopped, the energy in his body explosively dispersed, flooding through his meridians. That comfortable sensation now became one of absolute misery, plunging Tangji from heaven into hell. As the energy rushed through his body, blood began to flow out of his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth, and even began to leak out of the pores on his skin. Tangji felt like his body was being gnawed on by countless ants, and one torrent of energy rushed at his brain. His brain began to buzz as if something was madly knocking against it. He knew that he was as good as dead if this went on, so he shouted with all his strength, "Big brother Xu!" Xianxia immediately charged out of his room, and when he saw what was happening, he shouted, "A Jade Gate Heaven Charge!" How could that be? Chapter 7, Jade Gate Heaven Charge. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. Within the human body was the Jade Gate that served to lock away the world. Spiritual energy permeated the world, but mortals could not sense, absorb, or digest it, only passively receive it. This was because of the Jade Gate. If one wished to cultivate immortality, one first had to charge through the Jade Gate. Only then could one step onto the spirit platform and sense the world. It was for this reason that cultivators called the first realm the spirit platform realm. This was the first major threshold of cultivation. Charging through the Jade Gate required energy, and as mortals normally did not have spiritual energy in their body, they found it very difficult to break through the Jade Gate on their own. They would usually require the assistance of their seniors. But spiritual energy was not the only way to break through the gate. Those of a sufficiently brave or heroic nature could crash through this gate. The world abounded with heroic characters, and when they suddenly erupted in strength in the middle of a bitter melee, it was because they had broken through the gate. This phenomenon was called the Jade Gate Heaven Charge, referring to how someone had managed to break through the Jade Gate without anyone's help. But the Jade Gate Heaven Charge only sounded nice. It was not necessarily a good thing. The Jade Gate of the Spirit Platform, the gate opening of 9 cycles. This referred to the degree to which the Jade Gate was opened during the breakthrough process. The Spirit Platform Jade Gate had 9 layers, like 9 circular targets. Opening each layer was like punching a hole through the center of the target, allowing spiritual energy to flow through the hole into the body of the cultivator. The first cycle of gate opening was to punch through the first target. 3 cycles meant that one had punched through the 9th, 8th, and 7th layers all at once. The more gates one opened, the more spiritual energy would come through, and the better results one's cultivation would produce. Once the charge's power was spent, the Jade Gate's form would be fixed. For this reason, each person had only one chance at this in their lifetime. For this reason, the number of cycles one could achieve when opening a gate would define the quality of a cultivator to a certain extent. Though the Jade Gate Heaven charge did not rely on outside aid, as it depended on one's inherent strength, it was difficult to maintain. This meant that the degree to which the Jade Gate opened was never very large. Some people would not even be able to make one full cycle, only opening the gate a hair's width, meaning that they would never be able to step onto the spirit platform. So it was said that not relying on outside aid only sounded nice. A Jade Gate Heaven charge without external aid was like children in a kindergarten trying to draw without the guidance of a teacher. Tangji was radiating spiritual energy, one of the signs of the Jade Gate Heaven charge. Moreover, the spiritual light erupting from his body and the overflowing of spiritual energy were clearly not caused by a surge of blood energy. Rather, it was the result of spiritual energy entering the body and running rampant. This also meant that Tangji was not actually charging at the gate. Instead, the spiritual energy in his body had gone out of control and was running amok in his body, inadvertently ramming into the Jade Gate. Thus, rather than calling it a Jade Gate Heaven charge, it would be better to call it energy corruption. Tangji was probably the first in the history of the cultivation world to suffer from energy corruption without even cultivating. Fortunately, it wasn't difficult for Xianxia to save him. After all, someone with a low foundation was like a child, and the trouble one could cause was ultimately limited. But Xianxia truly didn't understand. Why was there suddenly spiritual energy in Tangji's body? He urgently asked, "What happened to you?" Had some cultivator come by and sent spiritual energy into Tangji's body but failed to teach him how to guide it, resulting in the spiritual energy getting out of control? Tangji struggled out, Big brother Xu, I was cultivating the Visceral Manifestation Classic." The Visceral Manifestation Classic? Xianxia was stupefied. How could that be? He knew the effects of the Visceral Manifestation Classic. Upon obtaining this art, Xianxia had discovered that it was a method for absorbing spiritual energy without passing through the Jade Gate. At the start, he had treated it as an absolute treasure, believing that while other people could only absorb spiritual energy through the Jade Gate, one who cultivated the Visceral Manifestation Classic could absorb energy from two sources, thus doubling the effectiveness. For this reason, this was an art that excelled at boosting one's cultivation. But only when he cultivated it did he discover that the amount of spiritual energy that could be absorbed was tiny, far less than what could be absorbed through the Jade Gate. While it seemed like Tangji's body was raging with spiritual energy, Xianxia could gather this much energy in the space of a single breath. Moreover, when cultivating the Visceral Manifestation Classic, even the rate at which he absorbed spiritual energy through the Jade Gate was severely reduced. In whole, the effects were worse. Xianxia hadn't taken this seriously at first, believing that he just wasn't proficient in the technique. After all, the creator of the art had been a peerless master who had gone to great lengths to hide this art away, so it could not be so useless. There was no one who would receive a huge boost in cultivation without gaining proficiency in an art. So he continued to diligently study this art. Yet as the days dragged on without any progress in the Visceral Manifestation Classic, he gradually began to become discouraged and consider the art of dubious worth. Otherwise, he would not have so easily taught it to Tangji. But when he saw the spiritual energy running amok in Tangji's body, the Jade Gate coming under assault, his mind was finally opened. As if a bolt of lightning flashed across his mind, Xianxia shouted, "So that's it. The viscera are within and the manifestations take form on the outside. Then, after forming the manifestations, bolster the internals, charging at the Jade Gate without using any external force." The Visceral Manifestation Classic was an art for charging at the gate that the Nindak Martial Lord prepared for his reincarnation. Damn it. I'm an idiot. A real idiot. How did I not realize this? Xianxia slapped his head. He couldn't be blamed for not thinking of this possibility. No one in the cultivation world had ever created an art for charging at the gate. Firstly, creating an art for absorbing spiritual energy without going through the Jade Gate was very difficult. Secondly, Anyone who was capable of creating such an art had no need for it. As for their descendants, they could just pour in spiritual energy to open the Jade Gate. There was no need to waste time and energy on something so meaningless. The rigid thinking of millennia had caused Xianxia to not even consider this angle, which was why he had taken it as a treasure dart that could double his cultivation speed. He was excited to realize the truth, but he was also disheartened upon realizing that the art he had been cultivating for so many days was an art for charging at the gate that was completely useless to him. While he was lost in his own gains and losses, Xianxia was reaching his breaking point. Lying on the ground, he painfully moaned, "Big brother Xu, big brother Xu." Xianxia was called back to his senses by his cries, and only now did he remember that Xianxia was still lingering on the precipice of death. When he looked at Xianxia again, there was a complicated mixture of emotion in his eyes. He reached out a hand and poked Xianxia's body. That berserk spiritual energy was immediately pacified, no longer bashing around his body. It still remained in Xianxia's body, making him feel uncomfortable, but at least it was no longer as painful. Xianxia then said, "Do you have a desire to become a cultivator?" "Yes." Xianxia loudly shouted. At this point, he finally and loudly voiced his desires. He loudly shouted, "I want to learn, so I followed you." I studied the Visceral Manifestation Classic, and even though I knew that it was dangerous without the mantra, I still wanted to learn it. Why? Xianxia laughed. A true man aspires to travel far and make his mark, to stand tall and look with disdain at the heavens. How could I be resigned to the empty life of a fly? Immortals exist, so I want to be one. There's no need for any other reason besides that. In Xianxia's eyes, people wanted to become immortals for the same reason as they sought promotion and wealth. Did there need to be a reason to seek promotion and wealth? No. Wanting to become an immortal didn't need a reason. It was not wanting to become an immortal that needed the reason. Xianxia was stunned. "This is your reason? Is that not enough?" Xianxia laughed. Although Xianxia had pacified the spiritual energy inside him, the pain was still excruciating, yet he still managed to keep up his smile. He looked at Xianxia, mustered all his strength, and shouted, "Then what if I give you another reason?" Because I don't want to be like the villagers of Little River Village, becoming fish on the chopping board of others." With this roar, he finally released all the negative emotions that he had been storing up at the bottom of his heart all this time, bellowing his hatred at those who had destroyed his home and loved ones, bellowing out all the thoughts he had buried away for so long. Xianxia gave a slight nod. Then, "You truly are the last villager of Little River Village." "Good, very good. I was actually fooled by a 12-year-old boy." If he still couldn't realize the truth after hearing Xianxia's indignant and sorrowful answer, then he was truly a fool. Xianxia fearlessly looked at him. "Yes, but didn't you already guess? Isn't that the reason you didn't want to accept me?" Xianxia wasn't an idiot. He might have been initially fooled by Xianxia, but as the days went by, he would naturally notice a problem. But as they spent more time together, Xianxia came to like Xianxia, and there were some things that he wasn't willing to bicker about. Thus, he decided not to wonder about whether Xianxia was a villager of Little River Village or not. Hearing Xianxia's words, Xianxia shook his head. "Although you fooled me, I don't blame you. Regardless of what you say, you did save me. Moreover, you've taken care of me. So passing on to you a cultivation method is nothing at all. I did not take you as a disciple because I didn't want to harm you. You must realize, the Immortal Path is dangerous." Xianxia coughed blood and smiled. "Is there any place in the world that isn't dangerous?" What crime did the villagers of Little River Village commit to be slaughtered? Just because the villagers of Little River Village were unlucky doesn't mean that everyone is unlucky. But all those who walk upon the Immortal Path must vie against the heavens and struggle against their fellow men. Not one day will be a peaceful one. And that's why I need to walk it. Xianxia had nothing more to say. After some thought, he nodded. "If you want to learn, I can teach you, but you must first answer my question." "You want to know how I was able to gather spiritual energy?" Xianxia asked. "Yes." Xianxia nodded. "The Visceral Manifestation Classic has 12 forms, and each movement is incredibly complex and is a combination of numerous hand signs. Moreover, Each form has its corresponding cultivation mantra. The mantras of the Visceral Manifestation Classic you have are not complete, and they are all out of order. How were you able to allow spiritual energy into your body without the complete mantra? Tangji answered, the mantras I have truly were incomplete, and even the parts I had, I didn't fully understand. The entranced mind that focuses on one's aspirations, engaging the organs and abandoning essence, I don't get it at all. But I can ignore what I don't understand and focus on what I do. Energy running through the 100 meridians, flowing smoothly and without obstruction, I understand this. Cultivators cultivate using the spiritual energy of the world, right? Since the energy must flow through the 100 meridians, you first have to have energy. I once heard you say that when one can sense the energy cave point, the energy will come through on its own. In other words, energy begins from the energy cave point. As Tangji explained his thought process, still in pain, Xianxia was stupefied. Tangji's method was very simple, skipping past what he didn't understand and trying according to what he did understand. There was an order needed when sending energy through the 100 meridians. The energy cave point belonged to the lesser yin foot kidney meridian, so the appropriate route was the very same meridian. Thus, he just needed to go along the four fullness point, the middle pouring point, and all the other points in that meridian, thus saving Tangji the need for those other mantras. Even if there were missing parts, he could just deduce the missing parts. Note, the lesser yin foot kidney meridian is also known simply as the kidney meridian. All three acupuncture points mentioned here belong to this meridian. In particular, the energy cave point is described as 3 inches below the navel, while the four fullness and middle pouring points are 2 inches and 1 inch beneath the navel respectively. Besides that, the 12 forms of the Visceral Manifestation Classic were also extremely important, each movement closely connected to the mantras explaining how energy should be circulated. Tangji noticed that the first movement opened up all of the positions in the lesser yin hand heart meridian, so that was the meridian it corresponded to. Thus, the second movement naturally had to have a corresponding meridian as well. The human body had 12 major meridians, and these corresponded to 12 major movements. Thus, Tangji was able to smoothly find the right order for the energy flow, linking together the snatches of mantra Xianxia had given him and successfully performing the art. Tangji had been born in a family of traditional Chinese medicine practitioners, and though he had never actually taken up that profession, this was a profession that valued knowledge even more than technique. After spending a long time immersed in this environment, Tangji had developed a rather deep understanding of the human body, which had allowed him to succeed. Xianxia was flabbergasted at what he was hearing, never thinking that someone could cultivate using this method. He muttered, "Do you know how dangerous this was?" Spiritual energy was not something that could be played around with, and cultivation was not something that could be casually imagined. Each art and each mantra was achieved through the tireless effort of one's predecessors. Tangji was able to use his imagination to cultivate spiritual energy through the Visceral Manifestation Classic, but this owed more to luck than to genius. This was because sensing and absorbing spiritual energy was the fundamental function of the Visceral Manifestation Classic. But doing something as complicated as getting the energy flowing through his meridians in the right order and increasing his spiritual energy was not something that could just be imagined. The various leaps of faith and deductions had ultimately caused energy corruption. If not for Xianxia, he would have died a violent death. Of course, I understand. Tangji squeezed out a faint smile. But I didn't have a choice. Big brother Xu, I want to cultivate. I want to cultivate. These simple words that contained Tangji's aspirations left Xianxia's heart shaken. It was such a familiar scene. His mind went back to that stubborn young boy facing his father and saying similar words. Tangji's words had inadvertently stirred up great waves in Xianxia's heart. After a long while, he let out a long sigh. Forget it. Forget it. Since you're so determined, then let's see how lucky you are. Right now, the spiritual energy in your body is running amok, and you're at the crucial stage of charging at the Jade Gate. If you succeed, You can set out on the immortal path. I will now pass on the complete mantra of the Visceral Manifestation Classic to you. Circulate spiritual energy according to the mantra and break through the Jade Gate. He pressed a finger on the Wind Palace point located on the back of Tangji's neck. The pacified spiritual energy in Tangji's body once more went berserk, causing Tangji to yell in pain. Xianxia harshly barked, "Don't shout. Focus your mind, breathe in, and guide the spiritual energy into the Wind Palace. With courage and vigor, charge at the Jade Gate and step onto the spirit platform." As Xianxia spoke, Tangji gritted his teeth and fell silent. Charging at the gate used energy as its force, and crying and wailing would waste spiritual energy. Without sufficient force, the Jade Gate would be difficult to open, and fear and pain would shrink one's resolve, obstruct the meridians, and hinder the flow of energy. The reduction in efficiency was so bad that even if the Jade Gate were opened, one might only be able to perform 1 or 2 cycles. Thus, charging at the gate required a fearless resolve that did not flinch in the face of pain, courage and spirit. Of course, too much courage and spirit was no good. The human body had a limit, and when one broke through this limit, spiritual energy might rush at the spirit platform and damage it. The minor consequence of this was damage dealt to the entire body and the wounding of one's vitality. A medium consequence was the destruction of the spirit platform and the end to any aspirations to the immortal path. As for the serious consequence, that was the destruction of one's internal organs, death on the spot. Thus, when the disciples of immortals charged at the gate, they needed to take countermeasures, and they would have seniors overseeing them to react to any sudden developments. Now, with Xianxia's guidance, Tangji felt a point of spiritual light entering the Wind Palace point on the back of his neck, guiding him upward. He was already in a world beyond description. Tangji felt like he was in the clouds, and above the clouds were 9 rings of jade gates, their centers spiraling, creating a bizarre black hole that drew Tangji's mind toward them. Chapter 8. Stepping onto the Immortal Path. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. When Tangji woke up, he found himself lying in the bed. Sitting up, he saw Xianxia standing nearby in front of a desk, writing something with his brush. Without turning his head, Xianxia said, "Lie back down. Your Jade Gate was just opened and your spirit platform is still unstable. It still needs time to firm up." With a flick of his hand, the talisman beneath his brush flew up and attached itself to Tangji's body. It was only now that Tangji realized that the world looked different, that all of the objects around him had become clearer, the colors were vibrant, the air more beautiful, and his body brimming with strength that seemed like it could never run out. "Big Brother Xu, are you saying that I can cultivate now?" Tangji delightedly asked. "In terms of aptitude? Yes." "Wonderful." Tangji was so excited that he wanted to jump, but as he began to move, the talisman on his body flashed. Tangji was instantly rendered immobile and forced to lie back down. "I already told you not to move," Xianxia said, turning around and thrusting the brush at Tangji several times. Several threats of light appeared in the air and wound themselves around Tangji. "Big Brother Xu, this is..." Tangji didn't understand what was going on. "A minor spirit constricting art. It can temporarily restrain the spiritual energy in your body and prevent it from moving around. Last night, your spiritual energy ran amok, doing severe damage to your meridians. You need to rest and recover before you can actually begin cultivation. Spend the next 2 days taking a good rest. I've already gotten some time off for you from your job at Anyang Prefecture," Xianxia lightly said. At this time, Xianxia put down the brush and sat down next to Tangji. Smiling, he said, 5 cycles of the Jade Gate, medium aptitude, not bad. Even more astonishing is that you did it alone. That you were able to reach this stage is a sign of your astonishing persistence." 5 cycles meant that Tangji had opened 5 layers of the Jade Gate. The Jade Gates of the spirit platform could be divided into high, medium, and low grades. 3 cycles and lower was considered low grade, while 7 cycles and above was considered high grade. Tangji had completed 5 cycles of his Jade Gate, making him the middle of the middle. Though he wasn't some incredibly talented individual, he also wasn't trash. After hearing Xianxia say this, Tangji finally hazily recalled that last night, Under Xianxia's guidance, he seemingly had charged through 5 gates. Charging at the gates brought immense pain, and even with his adult resolve and astonishing persistence, he only managed to reach the 5th layer. After breaking through the 5th layer, he had fallen unconscious, thus putting an end to any further progress. What a pity! In the end, my persistence was lacking, and I wasn't able to hold on. Tangji was overcome with regret. Xianxia smiled. If your persistence is no good, then no one in the world has good persistence. Charging at the gate isn't something that can be done purely through persistence. The Jade Gate seals away the heavens, but different people are sealed to different extents. Some people have gates that are naturally tightly shut, and even using spiritual energy until their bodies explode might not be able to open a single gate. After all, the amount of spiritual energy a mortal body can contain is limited. Charging the gates required spiritual energy, and mortals had a limited amount of spiritual energy that their body could contain. Thus, what decided the number of gates that could be opened was one's persistence and how tightly shut the gates were. If the gates were rather loose, then the same amount of charging power would open more gates. Thus, charging at the gates had both a component that depended on one's innate qualities and a component that depended on one's efforts. Tangji was lacking when it came to innate quality, but his will was far above that of the ordinary person. His charge at the gates had utilized almost 100% of his available strength. Many immortal cultivator disciples would try for a high grade, but the immense pain would make them howl and back away, wasting spiritual energy and ultimately causing them to get a lower grade. For reasons related to innate aptitude and persistence, only a few disciples ever managed to possess a high-grade Jade Gate opening. The vast majority were medium or low grade. Thus, while 5 cycles of the Jade Gate sounded average, it actually placed him above the majority of cultivator disciples and was a rather decent aptitude. After hearing Xianxia's explanation, Tangji understood, and his regret was somewhat diminished. But Xianxia shook his head, not satisfied. If it were anyone else with a 5-cycle Jade Gate, I would think that it wasn't bad, but you're different. Your method of breaking through the gate was developed by the Nindak Martial Lord for his reincarnation. It's somewhat unacceptable that this was all that you were capable of. Who is the Nindak Martial Lord? Is he someone incredible? Tangji curiously asked. To his surprise, Xianxia's face darkened at this question. The Nindak Martial Lord was a great power of this world, someone who had surpassed the immortal platform and stood above all the world. In his era, he would sense when anyone mentioned his name. The common people feared his power so much that they only dared to call him Martial Lord rather than his full name. Even though he's dead, he's not someone a puny mortal like you can doubt. Tangji straightened up after being rebuked, respectfully replying, "Yes, I know my errors." Xianxia saw that he had humbly received the lesson and was satisfied. "Forget it. I can't blame you. After all, you've only just taken your first step into the Immortal Gate, and there are still many things that you do not understand. For the next 2 days, I'll teach you about the things you need to pay attention to in the cultivation world." Tangji was delighted. From Xianxia's tone, it seemed he was planning on formally taking him as a disciple. He hastily said, "Yes, Master." But Xianxia waved him off and said, "Don't call me Master. I'm not taking you as my disciple." Tangji was flabbergasted, upon which Xianxia said, "There's no need to be disappointed. I'm not taking you as my disciple for your own good. First of all, I'm being hunted by someone, and though I've managed to avoid them for now, my enemies will catch up eventually. If I took you as my disciple, I would only be burdening you. Secondly, you belong to the Sage Heart Kingdom, which is under the jurisdiction of the Basking Moon sect. It is not right for me to accept a disciple from Sage Heart without the Basking Moon sect's approval. Thirdly, I am from the Xia clan, and all my arts are passed down from my clan. They cannot be lightly passed down to those not of the Xia bloodline, so passing them to you would break the clan's laws. Fourthly, the Basking Moon sect is one of the 6 major sects of Rosacloud, a famed orthodox sect. When it comes to resources or lineage, it is far superior to the Xu clan. Rather than learning from me, it would be much better to join the Basking Moon sect. Tangji had never imagined that an immortal would have so many rules and restrictions when taking a disciple. Only now did he understand why Xu Muiyang had always been reluctant to accept him as a disciple. Xu Muiyang continued, "But our meeting must have been fated in some way. While I can't take you as my disciple, I can still teach you a few things. Once I have fully recovered, I will take you to All Spring City and help you get into the Basking Moon sect's Basking Moon Academy, thus resolving our karmic debt." Now that Xu Muiyang had said all this, Tangji knew that there was no chance of taking Xu Muiyang as his master. He could only nod and say, "Thank you, big brother Xu." Xu Muiyang heartily laughed. "Since you consider me your big brother, I can't let you continue on without knowing who exactly your big brother is." "Fine. Let's start from me. Let me tell you a little about the cultivation world." Xu Muiyang came from the Xu clan of Nadia Hill, one of the four major cultivation clans of Nadia Hill: the Kongs, the Gus, the Mings, and the Xus. The Xu clan was ranked 4th. Xu Muiyang was the third child of the Xu clan patriarch, Xu Huili. He had an older brother and sister, and also a younger sister. As a member of a great clan, Xu Muiyang was born with a golden spoon. Compared to his siblings, Xu Muiyang could be considered a genius. At the age of 9, he charged at the gates and opened 7 cycles. For a time, the patriarch had been inclined to make him the next patriarch, but Xu Muiyang quickly disappointed his father. Xu Muiyang had no interest in the strongest arts of the Xu clan, the 7 heaven-bewildering illusions and the Grotto Void Classic. On the contrary, he was naturally inclined toward the art of formations, specializing in the Tao of transformation and simulation. An immortal's 4 auxiliaries were pills, talismans, formations, and tools. Each one was extremely important, but there was no such thing as a top-class pill refiner who could order around a top-class immortal. Strength was a supplement, and status could also only serve as a supplement. It was no good for a team to be without a healer, but how many healers could carry a team? In the end, healers were supporters, and pill refiners served the same role in the back end. Could a logistics officer step onto the battlefield and start giving commands? The cultivation world was a world where the fist was king. Even if one possessed the ability to refine unique spiritual pills, if one ended up displeasing some big shot, one could still die with a single slap. For this reason, while immortals would be polite and respectful to cultivators possessing formidable support abilities when it was required, these things could never be converted into true power and authority. The Xu clan was a peak existence of Nadia Hill, and it had various formation masters, pill refiners, talisman creators, and artificers under its command. It did not need its future patriarch to personally handle such things. Thus, while the does of the pill, talisman, tool, and formation were not necessarily bad, they were only good careers, something for ordinary cultivators to pursue. They were not something the successor of a major clan should seek. Thus, Xu Huili was rather incensed that Xu Muiyang was ignoring his proper occupation, but Xu Muiyang stubbornly insisted. He was a very talented individual, and as he cultivated, he truly managed to flourish in the Tao formations. He quickly became the #1 formation master of Nadia Hill. As for his celestial heart realm cultivation, he had incidentally cultivated to that level under the pressure from his father and due to the requirements of high-level formations. For the majority of cultivators, the celestial heart realm was the greatest goal in their lives, but for Xu Muiyang, it had come incidentally. Yet this was precisely why his true fighting power was rather lacking compared to other true persons of the Celestial Heart Realm. Even though Xu Muiyang's formation abilities were getting stronger and stronger, his status in the clan continued to fall. In the end, the patriarch gave up on him and decided to ignore him and let him quietly cultivate his formations. But Xu Muiyang was not discouraged by his family's indifference. He continued to research the Tao formations, and his attainments grew by the day, until his name was soon known throughout the Rosa Cloud domain. It was at this time that Xu Muiyang received a very special invitation, and it was this invitation that had resulted in his being heavily injured and fleeing far from his home. Xu Muiyang had not gone into the details, But considering all that had happened, Tangji gathered that it was connected to that Nindak martial lord. That period of time when my clan abandoned me was probably the most free I had ever felt in my life, although many people felt regret over the fact that I had lost my place as successor. I had never planned on succeeding the Xu clan. I'm not a good fit. Xu Muiyang pensively said, managing a big clan isn't easy. At times, you'll have to sacrifice a lot. I didn't want to lose those things. So as to not lose anything, I was willing to not get those things. To not lose anything, you were willing to not get other things. Tangji pondered these words, and then he asked, then doesn't that mean that to get something means that you have to lose something? Yes. Xu Muiyang replied. You are different from me. You are someone who can accept losing to gain. I was sure of this the moment I learned that you were from Little River Village. 138 villagers were massacred, but you could still come up with the idea to trick me. If you are not naturally heartless, then you must have been born with absolute self-control. Do you understand how great of a threat these two kinds of natures pose to you? Threat? Tangji was confused. Yes, the heart demon tribulation. Xu Muiyang only now told Tangji about the heart demon tribulation. This was Tangji's first time learning about such a thing, and only now did he understand why it had been so easy to deceive Xu Muiyang. When an immortal is cultivating, they gradually come to discover their origin heart. From the moment the origin heart appears, all those deeds they committed in the past that go against their origin heart will brand themselves upon it. When the heart demon tribulation comes, these will turn into demons, thus leading to the tribulation. If it's like that and you have to go through this heart demon tribulation, doesn't it mean that the worse one's character is, the better the lower one's bottom line is, the easier it will be to overcome the heart demon tribulation? So they say that evildoers live 1,000 years. Those who will resort to any methods, anxious for achievement and profit and easily moved to murder. From this, you can see how dangerous the immortal path is. Then why hasn't the cultivation world become completely dominated by jackals, wolves, tigers, and panthers? It's not that bad. Extreme chaos will eventually give rise to order, for others and for oneself. While the callous and unrighteous might be strong, nobody likes them, let alone the orthodox cultivators. They don't even like each other. This kind of people can be compared to lions or tigers, and it's very difficult for them to group together, because none of them can trust each other. Tangji laughed and said, that's true. The wicked can only advance when among the good. If the whole world is full of evil people, then none of them can get anywhere. While lowering one's bottom line could allow one to rapidly mature, one would not be able to win the favor of others. While the cultivation world was cruel, it had order, and it would not permit such a scourge. Moreover, depravity was a sort of habit. Once one set down this path, it was difficult to turn back. This was comparable to killing for fun. When killing someone no longer went against one's origin heart, not killing did. This also meant that one would have to keep killing. No different from seeking death. For this reason, being bad for a lifetime was even more difficult than being good for a lifetime. Thus, I am saying that when you deceived me, you must ask yourself if this went against your origin heart. In the future, if you have no bottom line, you are certain to incur the wrath of the heavens and the people. Though each individual matter might be small, they will accumulate over time. So ask yourself, if I remained clueless about this matter, would you feel any shame? If you will, how much? Tangji seriously pondered the question, turning the matter over and over again in his mind. After some thought, Tangji raised his head and answered, in the future, I will carefully consider these things. But on this matter, though I deceived Big Brother Xu, I feel no remorse. This matter did not breach my bottom line, and I did not stain my origin heart. Xu Muiyang was stunned. He stared at Tangji, and after a while, he squeezed out, this bottom line is truly a little low. Chapter 9, Washing the Meridians. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. In the room, Xu Muiyang continued to tell Tangji about the cultivation world. Cultivation is divided into 5 realms, and each realm has 3 tiers, excepting the Immortal Platform realm, which has only 2 tiers. Thus, It is sometimes called the 5 realms and 14 tiers. The spirit platform realm is divided into the spirit spring, spirit lake, and spirit sea tiers, and these primarily refer to the amount of spiritual energy in one's body. Cultivators cultivate spiritual energy, and for this reason, the first realm focuses mostly on absorbing and circulating spiritual energy. In the spirit platform realm, one breathes in spiritual energy and uses this energy to modify one's constitution and increase the amount of spiritual energy that can be contained in the body. Thus, the spirit platform realm is often called the breathing period or the energy refining period. At this time, the cultivator still has the body of a mortal and has yet to reach the stage where they have shed their mortal shell and been remolded. They can learn spell arts, but as they can only be used through the spiritual energy in their bodies, their power is limited. It is for this reason that cultivators in this stage are normally called spirit disciples, and the spell arts they can use are normally simply called spells, not arts. Only after entering the mortal shedding realm can they harness the spiritual energy of the world and use true spell arts, finally earning the right to call them arts. And it is in this period that cultivators can truly shed their mortal body and reshape it into a spiritual body, which is why it is called the mortal shedding realm. As building the spiritual body and shedding the mortal body is the basis of cultivation, this is often called the foundation period or the spiritual body period. Did you get all that? Big Brother Xu's explanation is simple and concise. I understand everything. To put it simply, realms are qualitative improvements while tiers are quantitative improvements, right? Tangji answered. Xumuiyang smiled and nodded. This summary is fresh and interesting, and it also makes some sense. While it's not completely accurate, it's also not too far off the mark. At the same cultivation level, different cultivation methods would produce different results. According to Xumuiyang, the human body was made from meridians, blood, energy, the bones, muscles, and organs, and each part had its own purpose and use. Different cultivation methods and processes would bring about different changes, and it would also affect what one was good at. Even the simplest spells like Wind Blade, Frost Sword, Fireball, and Chain Lightning would show varying levels of power depending on the type of cultivation method the cultivator had used. Those with abundant experience would only need to see one attack to get a general idea of the primary cultivation method and background of their opponent. Moreover, not all methods were compatible, and it was crucial to determine if there were any conflicts between them. For example, the Heaven Fire Sutra primarily focused on the lesser yang triple burner meridian of the hand. Energy was dispersed in the heart cavity and ended in the liver and gallbladder. The liver was of the wood element and governed refinement. The heart belonged to the fire element and governed divinity. For this reason, the fire energy was vigorous. And once the technique was cultivated successfully, the Heaven Fire would have the power of a wildfire. But the Still Water Sutra used the lesser yin meridian of the foot, which rose from the spleen and ended in the kidney. The spleen was of the earth element and governed transportation. The kidney was of the water element and governed essence storage. Once one cultivated this technique, one would have the grandeur of all rivers running to the sea. But these two were not subordinate to each other and stood on their own. Not only did they stand on their own, they actually conflicted against each other. Someone who was unaware and cultivated them together would have their efficiency halved. Thus, with cultivating methods, more was not better. Rather, one had to ensure that they complemented each other. This is also another reason I don't want to teach you the Xu clan's arts, Xumuiyang said. The Xu clan's Grotto Void Classic cultivates the greater yang small intestine meridian of the hand, which emphasizes the eye, focusing on penetrating through the void and the creation of a grotto illusion. The Basking Moon sect cultivates the lesser yin heart meridian of the hand, which emphasizes the heart. The two do not share the same basis, but the heart is the master of the 5 organs and is the residence of the sovereign. Thus, it is better to start with the Violet Jade Mantra and Divine Firmament's Ord Classic of the Basking Moon sect as your foundation. So what you're saying is that cultivating the Violet Jade Mantra and Divine Firmament's Ord Classic of the Basking Moon sect doesn't mean I can't cultivate the Xu clan's Grotto Void Classic, but if I cultivate the Grotto Void Classic, I might not be able to cultivate the Violet Jade Mantra. Is that right? Tangji asked. Right, that's exactly what I mean. The Basking Moon sect is a brilliant and large sect, and its mantra is vast and very compatible. If you have it as your foundation, you will be able to learn anything in the future without a problem, and you will have limitless potential. Understood. This is like how a sea can hold a lake, can hold all rivers, but a lake trying to hold a sea will result in rampant flooding. Yes, you understand, Xianxia said with a smile. Tangji was a very clever child and could thoroughly comprehend everything that he saw only a little of. Xianxia was delighted to have such a student. Although he was not taking Tangji as his disciple, he was treating him as one. So aren't you saying that there's no point in me cultivating the Visceral Manifestation Classic? Tangji asked. The Visceral Manifestation Classic is merely a method for breaking through the gate coupled with the ability to wash the meridians. It does cultivate any particular meridians, so cultivating it will not produce any problems. Moreover, the Visceral Manifestation Classic is still a product of the Martial Lord, so I still feel it's not that simple. Continue practicing it, and you might gain something else in the future. My meridians are already hardened, so washing them has little use to me. With these last words, Xianxia shook his head and sighed. Washing meridians was really tempering and expanding the meridians. Once the Jade Gate was opened, energy would flow through the meridians. Different methods of energy circulation would result in different cultivation methods. The purpose of washing the meridians was simply to expand the meridians, allowing more energy to flow and the meridians to bear more energy load. If the human body was compared to a country, the meridians were the roads, with each acupuncture point being a stop. The wider the roads, the smoother the flow of traffic. More spiritual energy could flow through, and of greater power. There was an old saying in China, if you want to get rich, fix the roads first. The cultivation world had a similar saying, if you seek immortality, first wash your meridians. Besides washing their meridians, a cultivator who was just getting started also had to open their spirit eye, which was where spiritual energy was stored. Only by opening the spirit eye could spiritual energy be stored, expanded, and formed into the basic energy for spell arts. But different cultivation methods had different ways of opening the spirit eye, and even different locations. For this reason, Xianxia did not teach Tangji how to open the spirit eye. Tangji was going to enter the Basking Moon sect in the future, and that place would have even better methods than the Xia clans to learn. Thus, while washing meridians was building the foundation, a day that went by without opening the spirit eye was another day where Tangji had not formally become a cultivation disciple. So that means that I can only officially start cultivating when I enter the Basking Moon Academy? What? Getting impatient? Xianxia smiled. Tangji's face reddened, but he didn't argue. I'm just eager. I can understand what you're feeling, Xianxia said with a smile, but cultivation is not something that can be done in a day and a night. Only by laying a good foundation can you cultivate with greater efficiency. In truth, children your age, when your bones are not fully developed, are in the best period for meridian washing. Alas, most children are temperamental and are unable to suppress their yearning for spell arts and divine connections, and there are always those who seek momentary pleasure. For this reason, so many geniuses, after passing through the painful charging of the gates, were defeated at the simple washing of meridians, limiting their potential. He spoke these words with earnest sincerity, and Tangji felt his heart chill. He knew that Xianxia was warning him. He solemnly said, I understand. No matter where or what we do, patience is the key to our success. Excellent. Xianxia clapped his hands. And there's no need to be anxious. There's a limit to how much the meridians can be expanded, and meridian washing will normally be done in half a year. At that time, you can formally begin cultivating. I will take you to the Basking Moon sect, and, given my reputation as a formation master, there should be no problem getting you in. He didn't say that he would get him in based on the fact that he was a celestial heart true person, but that he was a formation master. It was clear that he was very confident in his Tao formations. From this day onward, Tangji cultivated the Visceral Manifestation Classic and washed his meridians. Though he was young, he had the soul of an adult, and he had long ago passed that youthful stage of his life where one lacked self-control. Thus, after his moment of eagerness, He did not repeat the mistake, and his steady progress amazed Xianxia. Such a sly fellow, yet also so prudent and capable, truly hard to understand. Xianxia was forced to admit that while Tangji might have lacked the greatest cultivation aptitude, when it came to how he conducted himself, he truly could not be regarded as a child. Even though he was busy cultivating, Tangji did not slack in his care for Xianxia. Every day, he continued to diligently clean the courtyard and go to work. Xianxia spent most of his time in his room, recovering from his injuries. But as the days passed, his condition became better and better, and he could soon go out whenever he pleased, even occasionally going through some punching routines when he was in the mood to exercise his lazy bones. He had nothing else to do today, so he was moving through the courtyard, taking in the scenery. Suddenly, he realized that the fake mountain, the pavilion, the stone table, and the surrounding flowers and plants had all been inadvertently arranged in a way that was in tune with the principles of the world. A few minor alterations would be enough to make them into a formation, so he immediately began studying it. He had a natural fondness for the Tao of formations, being so interested in researching formations that he even tossed aside the position of Clan Patriarch. Before this, he had been more focused on recovering from his injuries, but now that he was better, he naturally had the spare energy to focus on his hobbies. Under his control, formation lines began to spread out from his feet, linking to the objects in the courtyard. Flashing with brilliant light, they swiftly assembled into a small formation. Xianxia pointed at the small formation. Conceal. With a twinkle, the formation lines gradually faded away. If no one pointed it out, it would be very difficult to notice that there was a formation in this courtyard. Not bad. Not bad. Xianxia nodded in satisfaction at his newly completed work. This formation was something he had created on a whim, but he had come up with many new ideas in the process. Bursting with inspiration, he rushed back to his room and began to write down all the new ideas for formations he had. A large notebook was completely filled up, and with Xianxia having expressed himself to his heart's content, feeling that he had gotten everything down, he finally looked up and saw that it was already dark outside. His Clan's Grotto Void Classic placed importance on the eye, and so he could see as well in night as in day, so he had not realized the coming of the night. Strange, why hasn't that kid sent over dinner yet? Xianxia muttered. Tangji should have already come back and brought dinner over. But then he realized something and slapped himself on the head. Cheat. He charged out of his room and saw Tangji walking in circles in the courtyard, his eyes dazed. It was clear that he couldn't tell what direction he was going, and he would occasionally shout, "Big brother Xu," but his voice couldn't leave the formation, so Xianxia hadn't been able to hear it. From the look of it, he had been imprisoned here for a good half of the day. Phew. Thankfully, it was just an illusion formation, Xianxia said, so scared that he had broken out in a cold sweat. If he had laid down a killing formation, Tangji would have already been dead. Chapter 10, The Tao of Formations. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. In the room, Tangji glared at Xianxia and asked, "So you're saying that you laid down a formation in a moment of excitement and then went back to your room to write down your inspirations, forgetting about me?" Xianxia's face reddened. "I just forgot the time." He was a mighty true person of the celestial heart realm, but in front of a boy, he was like a child who had done something wrong. It was quite an amusing sight. Of course, Tangji couldn't be blamed for being angry. No one would be happy to be imprisoned for several hours the moment they got home. After hearing Xianxia's answer, Tangji stood up and left. "Where are you going?" Xianxia asked in surprise. "To make dinner. I was imprisoned the moment I got back, so I haven't even started on dinner yet." It wasn't long before Tangji came over with dinner. The two of them met together in the courtyard, Tangji never saying a word. "What's wrong? Are you still angry at me?" Xianxia chuckled and looked at Tangji. "Fine, I admit that I was wrong. I apologize. Is that okay?" The relationship between immortals and mortals was like that between gods and the common folk. Let alone being imprisoned for half a day, even if Tangji had been killed, no one would have dared to say anything. But now, Xianxia was actually apologizing to Tangji. It was easy to see that their relationship was an extremely deep one. Tangji shook his head. I'm not angry. I'm just wondering about what formations really are. How can they be so amazing? In the formation, he had felt like he was in a maze. The courtyard was still the same courtyard, but he couldn't get out no matter what he did. The room had been right over there, yet it had felt like it was on the other end of the world. He had been rather panicked and fearful at the time, but now that he thought back to it, he found the entire experience incredibly mysterious. For this reason, even when eating, he couldn't help but ponder it. What was the principle that could make ordinary dirt and soil into this sort of divine dimension? You've noticed it as well? Xianxia laughed. Yes. The Tao of Formations is truly an amazing field, encompassing all things and containing the supreme principles of the world. A single blade of grass and a tree can be made into a formation. It can be considered the number one mystery of the world. Even if cultivators use their entire lives, they might not be able to plumb even 1/10,000th of its depths, and its uses are limitless. When it came to his favorite subject, Xianxia became a fountain of ceaseless praise. So what is the Tao of Formations, really? Tangji asked. Xianxia answered, in the final analysis, the Tao of Formations is really just the cultivation of the world. Cultivation of the world? Correct. Xianxia sternly replied. If you consider the human body to be a world, what we cultivators do is cultivate our bodies. Outside of our bodies is the vast universe, another world. This world has mountains, rivers, lakes, land masses, and seas, and in truth, every part has its corresponding element. In our own bodies, the human body absorbs spiritual energy and circulates it to use immortal arts. The world also has spiritual energy. So why can it not be circulated to also produce immortal arts? The world has no consciousness, so it cannot circulate spiritual energy on its own, but through various methods, cultivators can configure this energy. These are formations. I see. Tangji understood now. In truth, this was just the physics from his previous world. Formations were really like advanced and exquisite machines that used spiritual energy as their power source. The formation lines in place of circuits. Spiritual energy was circulated to achieve a certain effect. But the laws of this world were different, and the users were different, resulting in different forms and effects, and even completely different methods of production. It was for these reasons that the Tao of Formations covered an extremely broad range of topics in the cultivation world. Of the four auxiliaries of immortals, pills, talismans, tools, and formations, formations had the broadest use. Not only were the guardian formations that could be used to protect sects, there were even formations that could support the other three auxiliaries. Refining pills required laying down a formation, creating talismans required a formation diagram, and forging weapons required carving formations. It could be considered an omnipresent art with far-reaching influence. Thus, there were many sub-branches of the Tao of Formations. Xianxia explained that formations were usually divided into dead formations and living formations. Dead formations were fixed and immobile. The small bewildering formation that Tangji had been trapped in was an example of a dead formation. Living formations were normally battle formations, and cultivators normally worked together to use them. These could multiply one's strength and were valuable tools used by the weak to overcome the strong. Besides that, they could also be divided according to function. For example, formations were required in the creation of pills, talismans, and tools, and people normally call this kind auxiliary formations, auxiliaries within auxiliaries. In short, there were many schools of formations with long and storied origins, and there was no real unified standard. Everyone had their own way of judging them and even different opinions on them. For example, some people believed that formations should be used as a support. They were manifestations of a cultivator's will in the outside world, and they should serve cultivators. For this reason, these people regarded Xianxia's view that the Tao of Formations was the Tao of the world with scorn and disdain. Ideals would guide one's conduct. Xianxia's ideals led to his proficiency in worldly formations. He was skilled in laying down or undoing formations of enormous size, but he was not as skilled when it came to battle formations or small auxiliary formations. When it came to an understanding of large-scale formations, there was probably no one in the Rosa Cloud domain who could match Xianxia. Xianxia went on, ceaselessly chattering, his eyebrows rising and falling in excitement. Tangji had never seen him so open with information before. He had gone to great efforts before this to learn about cultivation from Xianxia, even risking his life, and in the end, all he got to learn was the visceral manifestation classic. In the middle of all his excitement, Xianxia suddenly said, "Why not learn the Tao of formations from me?" Tangji was dumbfounded. Xianxia said, "This Tao of formations is my own, developed from all the formation treatises I gathered throughout the world. It's not a secret art of the Xia clan, so I can pass it on to you. I can see that you're smart and clever, a perfect fit for learning it. But my heart is on the Great Tao, and it's not good to have my attention divided." Tangji hesitantly replied, "While the Tao of formations was good, a person's focus was limited." Tangji was no longer that little boy who knew nothing about cultivation, and he was now deeply aware of just how difficult the Immortal Path would be. Many people would go their entire lives without reaching the apex. Why had the Xia clan patriarch been unwilling to have Xianxia learn the Tao of formations? It was precisely because he feared that Xianxia's scattered attention would interfere with his progress on the proper course. Tangji knew that he didn't have Xianxia's heaven-defying aptitude, and even someone who had opened 7 cycles like him had been hunted down by that golden-armored god. If Tangji split his attention, his future achievements would be limited. "You can't say that," Xianxia said with a shake of his head. "The path of cultivation is very difficult, and besides putting in hard work, you also have to possess comprehension. The Tao of formations and cultivation both contain the utmost principles of the world, and it's not like the two of them can't assist each other. Moreover, the Tao of formations is not completely useless in battle. In the battle at Jade Orchid Mountain, I was far weaker than that Xianxia, but I still managed to beat him away with my 8 gates heaven seal formation. If you had listened to your dad and focused on cultivating, you probably wouldn't have needed formations to beat that Xianxia silly." Tangji mentally grumbled. But seeing how happy Xianxia was, he truly couldn't bring himself to say these words out loud. Xianxia had mostly been a rather quiet fellow, exuding the aura of an immortal. Only now did Xianxia truly have the air of a mortal about him. It could only be said that he truly loved the Tao of formations. Xianxia continued, "Moreover, you're only washing your meridians right now and can't cultivate, so you don't have anything else to do. Since I've agreed to teach you a few things, but I can't pass on the Xia clan's immortal arts to you. Teaching you all about the Tao of formations I have learned in my life doesn't go against our promise. In the future, if you truly have no interest, I won't force you." "What about it?" "Fine," Tangji helplessly replied. Xianxia saw how unwilling he was, and was both happy and amused. Patting him on the head, he said, "Kid, still trying to suck up after getting such a good deal? Do you know how many people wanted to learn the Tao of formations from me? But I refused all of them." "Yes, your dad didn't want you to learn the Tao of formations, but you insisted on learning it. Others wanted to learn from you, but you didn't want to teach them. I didn't want to learn from you, but you insisted on teaching me. I wanted to learn immortal arts, but you're teaching me the Tao of formations. You must be a donkey, right? Doing the opposite of what anyone asks you." Ever since he had learned that Xianxia couldn't read minds, Tangji's silent rebukes were getting stronger and stronger. But whether he was willing or not, it seemed that he would have to learn the Tao of formations. After dinner, Xianxia started the lesson. The Tao of formations is a broad and deep field, but no matter the kind of formation, they all have 4 components: the formation eye, the formation lines, the formation gate, and the formation source. The formation eye is the pivot of the formation, the location of its core. It is like the human brain, controlling everything, and is the most crucial component. Without the formation eye, the formation will not operate as you want. This sort of formation would be a truly dead formation. The formation lines are the routes through which spiritual energy flows, like the blood vessels of the human body or the roads of the world. Without formation lines, the formation will be unable to operate. The formation gate is the door. It can allow people entry, permit them to leave, or keep out enemies. The formation source is where the formation obtains the power to activate. Humans require spiritual energy to use arts, and so do formations. I understand. The formation eye is the brain and gives commands. The formation lines are the blood vessels and bones, offering support. The formation gate is where the power is actually exerted, the four limbs. As for the formation source, it is the heart, a power source, like an engine. Oh, I mean, like our spirit eye, right? Correct. Cultivators use arts by drawing on the energy in their spirit seas, and formation sources use spirit stones or other external objects as a powerful source. Of course, the cultivator can use their own body as a power source as well. That's weird. I didn't see any spirit stones with that small bewildering formation of yours. That's because I added a small spirit gathering formation that can automatically gather spiritual energy. This technique is called overlapping formations. Then doesn't that mean that with a spirit gathering formation that can automatically gather worldly spiritual energy, a spirit gathering formation can serve as a formation source? But how is a spirit gathering formation activated? Does it power itself? Perpetual motion? Tangji's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Xianxia had never heard of the term perpetual motion, but he could understand the meaning by looking at the individual words. Laughing, he said, "How could anything be that good?" The spirit gathering formation requires external power to activate. I had to add spiritual energy to get it moving. And even then, the spirit gathering formation can only absorb the spiritual energy in the vicinity. Once the surroundings have been drained of spiritual energy, it will stop working. This bewildering formation was just a little game to me. Unless it was supplied with spirit stones, it would come apart on its own after 3 days at most. So there really is no such thing as perpetual motion. Tangji sighed. So that means that there's no such thing as a truly eternal formation under the heavens. Every kind of formation actually needs someone to maintain it or sufficient spiritual energy reserves to exist. Xianxia replied, "Perhaps there's no such thing as eternal formations, but there are formations that can exist for tens of thousands of years." Tens of thousands of years. Tangji was alarmed by Xianxia's words. "Yes, I experienced one myself not too long ago," Xianxia said, his expression turning solemn, his eyes brimming with reverence as he recalled that experience. After a long while, he sighed. "I'm still very far away from the great ones of ancient times. Otherwise, I wouldn't have only been able to open that first gate." He stopped there, changing the topic. "Forget it. Let's not bring that up. These are all things that you can't understand yet. Let's return to the Tao of formations. Of the 4 core components of a formation, the formation lines and formation source are the most complex. I will first teach you basic formation lines." He raised his hand and began to draw in the air. Several flashing lines appeared in the air, but after a few moments, they faded away. "Draw the formation lines I just drew in the air. Remember, you have to draw in the same order I did, without the slightest error," Xianxia indifferently said. Drawing formation lines was a basic skill for formation masters and often served as an entrance examination. While Xianxia wanted to teach Tangji, he also wanted to see if Tangji had any talent in the field. If Tangji truly had no talent to speak of, then he would not force the issue. A moment later, Tangji grabbed a tree branch and began to draw on the ground. He couldn't create light with his fingers like Xianxia, so he could only do this assignment the old-fashioned way, but his work was fine and meticulous. Xianxia was rather nonchalant at the start, but as he watched Tangji draw, he was startled. This was because Tangji had almost perfectly copied his formation lines. Once Tangji was done, Xianxia realized that it was an almost stroke-by-stroke imitation. How? How did you do it?" Xianxia said in shock. "It's very simple. Isn't it just an image made of lines?" Tangji was somewhat at a loss. In his eyes, while these formation lines were complex, they were just some geometric images. He just needed to focus a little to remember them. After all, back in school, he had become extremely familiar with such things. Since Xianxia wanted him to draw them, he would just draw them. He had not known that while Xianxia had asked him to draw them, he had never dreamed that Tangji would be able to draw everything. It wasn't like the Rosa Cloud domain didn't have math, But this kind of knowledge didn't have much status, and the depth of knowledge was lacking compared to Earth's. Those that understood it might not be capable of cultivating, and cultivators didn't have a need to understand. Only those cultivators who studied the Tao of formations would study this kind of knowledge. For this reason, what were extremely simple pictures to Tangji would leave passers-by baffled. Upon hearing Tangji call this very simple, Xianxia hastily drew another complicated figure on the ground. This time, instead of having Tangji copy it, he pointed at a formation line and said, starting from here and ending here, find 3 connecting lines that do not intersect. Tangji glanced at it and used his stick to point out, this line, and this line. Xianxia was flabbergasted. Finding 3 non-intersecting lines that connected amid this pile of complicated designs wasn't hard, but doing it so quickly was not easy. Xianxia asked another question, this time having him calculate the roots of each line and the areas they covered. Tangji hadn't imagined that a class on formations would become a math test, and he didn't know how far he should go with his calculations. Thus, he could only do exactly as Xianxia requested of him. Tangji had little interest in his math, but his mother had been a math teacher and had often used the lash on him to spur him in his studies, saying that he wasn't allowed to shame his mother. It had been less than 2 years since he had graduated, and he still retained most of what he had learned. Moreover, the questions Xianxia asked were not too hard. Thus, Tangji was able to answer more than half of the questions. Xianxia was getting increasingly alarmed. This was because Tangji had used several solving methods that even he didn't understand. The Tao of formations was very demanding on one's skill in changes and divination, but there were few who were truly interested in it. Those people who pursued the Tao of formations were mainly after the power of formations. The divination knowledge that was needed to use it was incredibly boring. The learning process, excruciating. It could be said that Xianxia could count the number of people he had met that were good with math using his fingers. But now, he had made a discovery that was both shocking and delightful. He grabbed Tangji and shouted, incredible, genius. And you say that you don't want to learn? You're a genius at the Tao of formations. Scared out of his wits, Tangji blurted out his thoughts. But I don't actually want to learn it. Nonsense. With such talent, how could you not love it? Xianxia was so excited that he had lost all of his usual grace. Seeing Tangji refuse to acknowledge his talent in this field, he was racked with heartache. You don't understand what love is. He was a die-hard believer in the principle that attitude determined everything, firmly believing that only with love could one achieve great things. His accomplishments in the Tao of formations were purely because of his deep love of the Tao of formations, his love of divination. In his view, Tangji's talent was because of his passion for the Tao of divination. Otherwise, how could he have reached such a high level of attainment? Tangji had never seen him like this, and was at a loss for what to do. But, Big Brother Xu, I truly don't feel any interest toward this. Then how can you explain your talent? Xianxia stubbornly insisted. Tangji helplessly answered, how do I know? Maybe I don't love the Tao of formations, but the Tao of formations loves me.